authentication.
Folks should be able to hear us. We have green lights on the ceiling and the video is on. It should auto zoom.
Oh,
There we
I thought
go.
we had to move.
Hand gesture. Sorry, you're crammed in a little bit, but we
Okay.
fit it in for the camera, and we will get started.
All right. I will call this meeting to order and we will begin with roll call.
Member Bonta,
Yeah.
member Adamic. Here. Member Kuzma,
Present.
member Barton,
Present.
Vice Chair Barton and Chair Stone.
Present.
We have a quorum.
All right, then we will move right on to item 3, which is oral communications from the public. This portion of the meeting is reserved to persons wishing to address the committee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes, and state law prohibits this committee from acting on any non-agendized items. Recently, regional and local elected and appointed bodies have been subject to disruptive, racist verbal attacks by anonymous callers during virtual public comments. The city of Mountain View is fully committed to racial, religious, and cultural equity and justice, and we strive to create a welcoming, safe, and inclusive community for all. This advisory body welcomes respectful and non-threatening public comments regarding matters over which this advisory body has jurisdiction. Comments deemed otherwise pursuant to the Council Code of Conduct and Government Code may be grounds for immediately terminating a speaker's comment period. Do we have any members of the public wishing to address the committee?
No one in the room has raised their hand and there are no hands in Zoom.
All right, then we will move on to item 4, which is minutes approval. For the meeting minutes of December 12th, 2004. 2024. Time has passed. I guess we move to any questions, clarifying questions? No. Public comment? Or any comments?
I'll move that we approve the minutes. They seemed complete to me from that cursory reading. Although given member Fenwick's former more careful perusal, perhaps I should start being even more careful with that.
I also read the minutes. It looked good. So I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
I'll abstain because I wasn't there, so I won't.
Counted 4 in favor and 1 abstaining. So the minutes are approved. We will move on to new business, item 6.1, which is going to be our manual on the election process for 2025 chair and vice chair.
Yes, actually, it's the BPAC members manual and the election process. So I have a presentation. Let me see where the screen is. Okay, is that sharing? Okay, and here we go.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm looking at this version and you're looking, oh, there we go. Okay, great. Okay, so we have first of all, we have the election and then we also have the members manual. So I'm just going to kind of go through the members manual. It's a useful reminder of what we do and some of the resources that you have, especially when we have a new member. So in terms of goals of the BPAC, the manual includes the goals, which is to provide an advisory input to council on matters relating to pedestrian and bicycle transportation, and also specifically to meet the requirements required to receive State Transportation Development Act funding. Each year we have an election, and so today is the day for the election, the first meeting of each year. There are 3 different types of roles in the BPAC. One of them is all members. You receive materials and review them. Let us know if you're going to be absent. And there's some outreach activities from time to time as part of the work plan as well, which would be great. And then there's also a chair and a vice chair. So the chair leads the meeting, the vice chair leads the meeting if the chair is not here. And then there's also a VTA BPAC representative who attends monthly meetings. And so today you'll be electing the new chair and vice chair for the BPAC. Meeting schedule and venue, I think you all know about that. You all managed to get here. Typically November gets rescheduled because of Thanksgiving, and sometimes we schedule other special meetings for reasons relating to either the schedule of particular projects or other issues. So each meeting we have the roll call, which you just did, public comments on things that are not on the agenda, and then the real kind of heart of the meeting is the agendized items, the new and unfinished business, and then work plan updates. So for each of the items that are on the agenda, the process is, first of all, staff presents information, then BPAC asks clarifying questions, and you can pre-submit these if you want to. And then there's public comment, opportunity for the public to comment. And the feedback we've received is that BPAC members are not members of the public. So even if you're not here, we've been told that you shouldn't be providing public comment. And then BPAC considers motions and discusses the issue. And sometimes motions are useful. Sometimes it's just feedback to staff. Please refer to the training that you got on the Brown Act. So we are subject to the Brown Act. And I think the key things to avoid are group emails and serial communications. So we're supposed to just talk on agendized items when there's a quorum of people. Correspondence on agenda items gets forwarded to the BPAC via email, and then if there are requested items, if they're in the work plan, it gets forwarded. If they're not in the work plan, then it gets forwarded to the chair. And for these kind of items where it's a work item that's being referred, the process in this council policy A23 is so it's not in the work plan at the moment, then we would forward it to the BPAC. You would consider if you want it to be added to the work plan. If yes, then we need to consider whether it's minimal resources. If so, then we can go ahead and check with the mayor and vice mayor who would authorize to add it to the work plan. If it takes more resources, then we need to ask, provide a council report and have them consider whether we want to spend the resources for it. There is also, if the mayor or vice mayor says no, there's another way that the BPAC can forward something to council for full consideration. And a couple more things there, but hopefully that makes sense. There's a shorter version of this, which is we have a work plan item once a year, and that's kind of an opportunity to kind of look at the whole thing all at once as well. There's also reference material in the BPAC members manual. We have some web pages that hopefully are useful. There's the city web page for walking and biking. There's also Ask MV. This is useful for things that can be addressed quickly out on the street. And then we also have our bylaws and handbook. There's links to different legislation, including the latest Caltrans Design Information Bulletin 94 on complete streets, and the public rights of way accessibility guidelines, which are making their way through the process. It's been accepted by the Department of Transportation now, so it's the standard for public transportation. I think it still has to be adopted by the Department of Justice for it to become the standard for all rights of way. Then there's links also to our plans and policies, including the most recent bicycle transportation plan, and then other guidelines and standards. that you might be interested in referring to for your deliberations. And some academic literature as well, and also a glossary. So, yeah, no, you can run the election.
Thank you. So I suppose we can ask clarifying questions on the presentation first. So does anybody have any clarifying questions? Member Kuzma.
And just to confirm, listen, for the election, it is that we are to do an election for the chair first and then an election for the vice chair.
It's up to you. If you
Oh,
want to
okay.
do them both at the same time,
Okay,
that's another option.
The memo implied that there was some restriction there, so, or called it out pretty explicitly, so I wasn't.
Oh,
sure
okay,
how
well,
it's-
follow the memo then.
I wasn't sure how stringently to take it.
As long as there's a motion.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, as long as if the important thing is that there's a formal motion, then great. Okay.
I was wondering, I didn't find the presentation attached to the agenda. Will it be?
Oh, yeah,
After
we
the
keep
fact.
this on the BPAC website.
But like the presentation itself?
I can, yeah, I can add
It's the
that.
important thing, the little diagram with the.
I know.
Oh, I see, okay, yeah, sure, we can add that.
And I guess another, like, how often should we be studying those guidelines? Do you expect us to
I think
be
it's,
familiar?
I would think that it's a reference. So if something comes up and you're like, oh, there was, it's a public right of way access, wasn't there a document? And then you go back and kind of dig up that thing. So it's a quick reference for when you're looking at something.
Are there any other clarifying questions? Is there any public comment on the elections presentation? Nope. Then we will move on to the election, and in the past, traditionally, we have had the vice chair has become the chair, and new vice chair has been the most recent member. But that's just tradition. There's no, as far as I know, hard and fast restriction on who becomes what. So do we have any motions or nominations?
Can we ask?
Yes.
The potential, whether they.
I won't refuse.
I drove a pass for this year, even as vice chair, because I haven't even done one meeting. So, and the vice chair, I understand, is kind of the step in, right? So should the chair be unavailable, and I wouldn't know what to do, so.
Oh, I mean, it's kind of an initiation, right, really?
I'll get initiated next year.
Member
that's fine.
Martin and I
Remember?
both chickened out of doing it when it was our first year, so I won't
But,
certainly
you know.
cast these stones.
So I drove a pass for this year, so.
So I can comment. Yeah, well, tradition would be that the vice chair becomes chair. That's only a tradition and we're not required to do that, correct?
Correct.
So I guess, do we have any motions or nominations?
I guess, you said you would not refuse. Do you want to be chair or would you prefer to?
I guess I feel the obligation to try to serve in that role. So in that respect, I am more than willing and would want to be chair. If there is someone that would like to serve in that capacity, I won't feel bad by not becoming chair.
Can I interpret that as like a positive?
Yes. I would gladly accept it. I won't stand in the way if there's a reason that somebody else believes it's appropriate or they can serve better.
I think I would be happy to be vice chair. I don't know if you have strong opinions on that or Member Adamic.
All right. Comfortable with that?
Then can I move that we have a motion that member Barton be chair for this year and I be vice chair for this year and have that just be a single month? We can do that separate process. That's convenient.
Does somebody else need? to make a motion?
No,
I think I'm allowed to nominate myself.
Yes, I believe you are, and I'm happy to second that motion. Yeah.
I'll second it.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Who was the seconder?
That was me.
Okay.
So,
Ex-chair Stone said that first, so.
yes, so Chair Barton will, I guess, take over my obligation of leading this meeting. And we don't have to move.
Yeah, keep your seats.
Oh.
Gotta move.
Okay, thank you for placing your faith in me. I will endeavor to meet all expectations, but please attempt to guide me or provide feedback as needed. Okay, so I believe this concludes discussion of item 6.1, elections in EPAC members manual. So moving on to item 6.2, tours and reports from the police department. I believe we have a presentation and presenter.
Hello. I'm Carly Kakis. I'm the crime analyst, the new one. I'm sorry I'm not Kelly, but I'm hoping that we will have a good working relationship together. I'm the crime analyst here for Mountain View Police Department. Not only do I support you, I support the patrol division, investigations, and administration, as well as all of the other fine citizens of the city of Mountain View, both living and working here. So one of the visions that the new Chief Canfield, Captain McGee, and Captain Nelson have shared with me since I got here was they really wanted to push the public-facing transparency dashboard. So I do have that to share if I'm allowed to share my screen. Do I have permissions? Fantastic. Okay, stand by. Let's see. Can you see this?
Pulling up, yes.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So this transparency dashboard is available through the City of Mountain View's website, as well as the police department site, and then transparency, and there's a big transparency button. And your BPAC information will be in the traffic section. So I'm just going to go to that. Every section has an introduction, just telling you what you're going to expect as far as data within the specific tab that you are operating with. One of the things that I noticed in research and development for this dashboard, I did research, as well as the group of people that was doing R&D for this, we researched other agencies and how they were sharing their data. And one of the things that I noticed was difficulty navigating data and filtering data in a way that makes sense to you, which you meaning the user of this information. You are the ones that we want to feed with this information. And how can I make it user friendly and not scary? Because sometimes data is very scary, and it frustrates people, and then they get frustrated, and then they don't know how to use it. So I wanted something that was very calm, very understandable. And believe me, this is the first iteration of this, and I'm hoping through years and months and decades that this will be more amazing than it is today. So with that being said, there's an introduction for traffic collisions. Any section that says interactive within the title means that you can play with it. And I do this because there are specific groups of people in our fine city of Mountain View that have more expertise than me, i.e., let's just say Green Acres Neighborhood Association or Farmer John's Farmer Patch and they know more about their area of representation than I do. So I wanted to make sure that you could come together and discuss the data in a way that makes sense to you. Open it up for discussions, move data around in a way that makes sense to your expertise, open discussions, and find ways that maybe the police department can assist you in making safer choices for the area that you represent, and so on and so forth. So this information, this 90-day only, gives you a very tactical look at what our accidents look like. It is 90 days of information in a density map. If I did this for all the information that we have, Mountain View would just be a big white hot dot, and that wouldn't be helpful for anyone. So this density map specifically researches 90 days worth of information. This dashboard specifically is updated every month. So probably in a week, I'll be updating this one with a new 90 days worth of grab. One of the things that I added is beat. Our beats are how the city is sliced up for patrol coverage. Some beats may be larger geographically as they may be less densely populated. With regard to that, each beat should have similar population sizes. So if you don't know what beat you're in, you can search this, put in an address, and it'll zoom into what your beat is, if that is a concern for you. And once you find out what your beat is, you can actually toggle these, and everything will change based on what you're asking the data to show you. So this is very interactive based on beat. And this is pretty straightforward. These little dots are schools. And then I was able to get a bike map overlay and bikeways and pathways from city streets to layer onto this. The next section is called interactive metrics. So also all of these sections, depending on your screen size, can be modified. You have the power to readjust any of these screens to accommodate your screen size. We are working on a mobile feature, but for now, this is best viewed on your computer or laptop. So one of the things that is of concern is vehicle versus pedestrian. You can click on vehicle versus pedestrian, and all these metrics will pop up based on your specific ask. Then you can drill down a little more specifically and look at year. So if you'd like to see things differently, you can click on the year to kind of make this a little more finite as far as your aggregate totals for that specific entity versus entity. The next section is not interactive. It's just merely trends showing time of day, day of week, and month. And I know it was mentioned that this said January, my apologies, but this was changed. So then the next one is just primary collision factor. The density map covers 90 days. The other sections of this cover January 2022 to December 2025. And as of the first week of February, will encompass January of 2025. Interactive annual comparisons, the same kind of thing. This is year over year, more strategic look at the data. And then if you'd like to do it by beat, say that maybe we had a thoroughfare in beat 3 that encompassed a lot of our schools, and we were looking for a safe way for our children to get to schools, we could click on beat 3 and just say the year over year comparisons within that beat. That is a overarching view of what this is, but I just wanted to, on behalf of the Mountain View Police Department, I just wanted to thank you for everything that you do, and we're hoping that this will help you facilitate discussions so that we can work together and we can visualize data in a way that's stimulating and thought-provoking.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I think the next item would be clarifying questions from members of the VPAC. Liquid model you have.
Yeah, I guess first question would be, I was just looking, remembering this, but do reports or enforcement of parking violations show up anywhere in this? I guess actually an equivalent question would be or maybe not equivalent, but would do like tickets or the such for speeding or other traffic violations show up anywhere?
Not within this tab. I think we are currently working, we have a roadmap for new iterations of the dashboard. And I believe citations, both moving and parkers, will be in a new iteration of the dashboard. But
Thank
we
you.
have to discuss that, but it is in the roadmap for future iterations.
All right, thank you. And the
Uh-huh.
second, oh, are you gonna say more?
No, I'm good.
Okay, the second question is, I guess, more, it's judgment based, and just because when I asked the question about there being zero DUIs in the in vehicle to pedestrian and vehicle to bicycle collisions, is that typical? I mean, the literally zero DUIs when they are a very non-insignificant fraction of vehicle to vehicle collisions is a surprising piece of data to me. So it's very interesting to me if that's true. But and so I'm just sort of, if anyone, I don't know if you or anyone else knows if that's typical for cities or if there's something unusual here. I don't know. It just really struck me. So I was curious if you had any perspective on that.
I can answer that. In my experience when working, I'm sorry, this is Lieutenant Fernando Maldonado. I think that you're talking about the vehicle versus bike as a DUI. I think that that's probably because of the time that the DUIs typically happen mostly after hours. So usually the bike traffic is a lot less, maybe down to zero. At the time that the clubs let out, right, is usually when we have these DUIs, right? So I think there's a lot less bikes out on the road during that time, and that's why typically there aren't, for us, any bike versus vehicles that are DUI related.
I did actually look into that just for curiosity's sake, and a lot of times it's vehicle versus object.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Those are the questions I had.
Any other clarifying questions?
You asked my question.
Okay. Member Adamic.
Yes, so in years past, I think for this item or its equivalent, we were given spreadsheets. And I was wondering if those are still available to either us or the public.
At this time, we're not exporting our data. The dashboard does not export that data. If that's something that's still needed based on a mission or value, then we can discuss that at a higher level with the chief and see if that's still amenable to him. But the dashboard is moving to take the place of that.
Okay, and then as far as how this can be archived, like in the past, I think the spreadsheets were attached to the agenda so that in principle, one can go to the Mountain View website and see what happened in years past. How do we handle this now that, you know, there's like a dashboard, there's a link, but what is available there can change?
Yes, it can, and it will build off of what's currently here. So it will keep building on top of this. So you will be able to obtain or glean that strategic data that you're looking for, those year-over-year trends. If there's something specific that you're requesting for BPAC, for the mission of BPAC that maximizes the value of one of your goals, if you will, we can most certainly look into accommodating you. It would just have to be approved by the chief.
Yeah, I think the thing that does here is that the dashboard will keep that data from 2022 moving down the line to say 10 years from now versus a static old spreadsheet that's nothing's going to change on it, right? Unless there's something that I don't see that there's value in it to you guys can let us know and we can look into it.
I could also respond to this question. So there is also a publicly available system via TIMS, which is managed by UC Berkeley. I forgot what TIMS stands for.
Traffic Information Management.
There we go. Yes, Traffic Information Management System. So that's another way of getting similar information.
Similar, okay. And is there any plan to backfill this information prior to 2022?
We decided that 2022 was the starting point for all the dashboards because there was a transition from UCR reporting to NIBRS, which is listed here. So because of that transition, it makes sense for us to start our public-facing transparency dashboard at January 2022. As I've stated, if there's something in your mission statement that going back pre-pandemic would be of value to something that you are planning, absolutely, we can accommodate you. We would just get that request approved by the chief, but we have the information. It would just take a little while to provide you with a packet, if you will, if that makes sense.
Okay, I'll just briefly reply because it's just kind of hard because I keep asking the same question. It's just that for the next several years, any trend line is going to be pretty meaningless because we have 3 data points. So that's why.
What
I'm
is
asking.
3 data points? Can
Well,
you explain?
2022, 2023, and 2024 as points of comparison. If that makes sense.
So all further years would, I'm sorry,
I'm
can
just
you
saying,
repeat that?
or since we're starting 3 years ago, currently the trend line has 3 data points, and it's hard to deduce a trend from 3 data points.
From
Just
3 years of data?
Statistically, yeah.
So that this is hard to ascertain a trend?
Yes, statistically it is.
Okay. Is there some, I think maybe offline, if there's a specific ask that you have, we can accommodate you with that. But I think for the public consumption, I think we're giving it to them, giving it to the people that are concerned about this in a manner that's understandable to them. And there is a way, if you're on this, you can flip to the survey section and feel free to provide us with feedback. If you don't like something and it's not enough data, feel free to let us know and we'll put it in our roadmap for future iterations. This isn't the end all be all. This is literally just the first conception of this, and we're very excited about it because it shows transparency and we want to share information with our citizens and inform them and keep them safe. We want to provide value. We don't want to provide a decorative product. So if you have something that is of great value that you think everyone should be aware of, please don't hesitate to fill out that survey and we will definitely look into it, because I'm not an expert in all matters BPAC. I count on you and the new chairperson to help me and educate me in the ways that this can serve both you and the community at large with the information we're giving, if that makes sense.
I have a clarifying question that may help a lot of concern, and give you a little sense of the direction I think we want to go. So we mentioned the TIM.
Point of order, is this a clarifying
Yes,
question?
yes. So we mentioned the TIMS database. The question is, the data on the dashboard aligns with the data in TIMS, I would assume. The data on the dashboard may contain some additional items that are not in the TIMS system, like BEAT, for instance, which would be specific to mountain. Are there any other areas of non-overlap that have been added to this database that could be useful? And if we don't have historical data beyond the 3 data points, that we would be missing any trends? And how easy is it to combine with TIMS for before 2022?
Are you asking me?
I'll give you a start, Rhea. I think.
Oh,
probably
you know what?
experience
I'm
with-
not really aware of TIMS, so you'd have to educate me on that. I will defer to your expertise.
Yeah, and I haven't looked into both of them well enough to know sometimes what we get more of in the city data is the actual police reports, the maneuvers, you know, things to do with the maneuvers that are happening. So but I haven't looked into this enough to know whether it includes that level of detail.
The
Okay, so
PCF, the primary collision factor?
No, not that is
Oh.
in the TIMS, but
Mhm.
some information on, you know, the person who was involved or the people who were involved in the collision and what was actually going on in the
Yeah,
collision.
there's more detail
Yeah,
perhaps
yeah.
in this, and I think,
Sometimes.
so I think we're saying we don't know.
Yeah, I don't know whether this is captured in this.
An action might be just to, on all parties, both the staff, for the police department information and BPAC itself, to try to understand the overlap and what we lose if we don't have back data on the police department report. So I don't know how easy it is to combine, given only one maybe has exports. I think you can export from TIMS certain fields, but not our.
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, I have more questions. So I was wondering why the near miss data is not included and where can it be obtained?
So the near miss data is not, we can't say if it's 100% accurate, right? Because it's only what's reported. So if we get 15% of near misses reported, is that really a valid piece of data to you, right?
So what do
There's
you
no way-
think the point of near miss data is then?
If you're only getting partial, is there value in that? I mean, if only a certain number of people report it, right? Nobody calls us and says, hey, look, we almost got hit. I know that they send them via the Ask MV, and sometimes there'll be some emails to us in command staff. But other than that, people don't report that.
So you don't find value in?
No, I'm asking you, is there value in that?
Well, I'm asking you, do you find value in that?
We absolutely, if it is all reported, we do get some near miss where they say, hey, look, there was a car that's speeding down by the school. Then we will send out patrol officers or the traffic team out there to do enforcement. But in terms of capturing that data, not everybody calls us.
But you capture some data, so what does it get used for, or does it not get used?
We don't compile it. We use it for enforcement. We use it for scheduled patrols. So if we're, like I said, if we're getting reports of people being reckless by a school, we're going to address that right away and then take care of that issue, right? But we don't compile that data for anything else other than sending patrol out there or traffic teams out there to address the issue.
And if someone submits a near miss report, do you reply to the person?
You mean like via Ask MV?
Yeah.
We do.
Okay, and then I had asked this question about, like, you can see collisions involving bicycles and pedestrians, but just in one of the tabs. How can we see the other tabs, like the trend line and heat map or whatever else for bikes and peds?
That's something that you can absolutely, I can take notes on that and put it in our roadmaps for other iterations if that's something that is important. What I don't want to do is clutter it with too much, because then it's very hard for smaller screens to readjust. So if that's something you wouldn't mind putting in the survey, like, hey, I would like another tab. It would be appropriate for BPAC if we had a tab with a density map and then the following information. We can definitely put it on our roadmap to discuss for further iterations. Absolutely.
And do we need to do the survey, or can we, like, in the comment part now, make requests?
Whatever works for you.
Thanks.
Not trying to make more work for you.
Okay, want to close any other clarifying questions?
I have the suggestions, but it's more.
Okay.
more comments,
One clarifying question from me we haven't covered yet. In the past, we asked for vehicle theft reports that were distinguished between bicycles and autos. Is that in the dashboard?
It is.
Vehicle thefts would be under property crimes.
There is a stolen bicycle.
So, yeah, there's theft from a
Stolen bicycle.
vehicle. Right, stolen bicycle, theft of vehicle parts, theft
They all
from
come into the-
vehicle, and then vehicle theft. And you can break these down by year as well. And then you can play here if you wanted to do vehicle theft and you live in beat 4, you can see annual comparisons. So there is availability here.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I see no other clarifying questions. So we're moving on to public comments.
We have one hand raised in Zoom.
Okay,
Bruce England, you can unmute yourself and begin speaking when you're ready.
I am ready. Thank you. Bruce England, Wisdom Station Drive. Interesting discussion. I do have some questions and comments. I got to get to my questions and comments. So you already had the conversation about using the TIMS system. So I think you covered it pretty well, but it is an existing pretty good, robust system, and PD doesn't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel if it makes sense to use that or at least leverage it. So anyway, I'm just expressing interest in having TIMS at least looked at for consideration in this new system. That's one. And then next one is, yeah, you talked about the near miss incidents. Member Adamic asked a number of questions on that. I agree. I think that should be included. They're just probably more near miss incidents than anything else. And things like, you know, encountering a vehicle where a person is texting and the vehicle's veering all over the place and you're trying to deal with that, or riding on a dangerous road like Dana Street, which is signed for 35 miles an hour. And honestly, people are veering all over the place in there, including right into the adjacent bike lane. And then, you know, we had a fatality, as you know, at Grant Road and El Camino, and it isn't like there's never been near misses at that intersection. There are plenty of near misses at that intersection. And if PD and other stakeholders knew that that was a problem based on the data, then some action might have been able to be taken prior to that, and then the fatality could have been avoided. So there are really good reasons to include the near miss data. And also, I mean, it can be carved out, right? I mean, you can filter it out. So if somebody feels like it's not robust enough data, then you could set it up so that it's filtered out. So yeah, the question was asked about tickets, you know, how many tickets are given. People who are walking and biking in Mountain View do question that, like how often they see police officers, they see something dicey going on, but the person isn't pulled over. And so it would be interesting, certainly for the public, to know about that. On the stolen bicycles thing, I don't know if members were edging this way on it, but sometimes it's not the bicycle stolen. It can be components on the bicycle that are stolen. And I'm not sure that's covered there in the reporting category. So I caught that. And then lastly, Carly, would you be willing to present a similar sort of presentation to the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition Mountain View team at one of our upcoming meetings? Because I could set that up for you if you're willing to do that.
I would be honored. This is how everything gets better with communication with the end user. And we build this together as a community to help the community, educate the community. So absolutely, I'd be honored to do that on behalf of Mountain View Police Department.
Okay, I'll reach out to you, and your email address follows the usual formula.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
okay, any additional public comments online?
We have Valerie, is her hand up? Valerie, you can unmute yourself and begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi there, this is Valerie Fennick, member of Rex Manor neighborhood here in Mountain View, resident of Mountain View for over 20 years, and former member of this committee. As a member of the BPAC, I had been very passionate about this near miss data and having it reported by the police. The police department is the only department that reports and shares on this. These tickets are sent to you. I have heard the issue raised many times about how it's not complete. but it doesn't make the data invalid. I have raised many near miss tickets. I raised one, in fact, on December 11th, 2024. I have not received a response from the police department for that yet. I raised a similar ticket for the same intersection for the against pedestrians and bicyclists, because it isn't specifically, it's at Wright and Polaris. It is an infrastructure design issue, very wide curves, and people cannot see, people traveling on Polaris approaching Wright cannot see the stop sign. It's behind a tree. There's lacking crosswalks, lacking sidewalks, but I've been nearly hit in a car, on a bike, and walking at that intersection. And I have not received a response, but it's an infrastructure issue and it needs to be reported and shared here so that the transportation team can take action upon it. Quoting the transportation department, the near misses are treated as collisions as far as the active transportation planning goes. That's from Karen Gauss. And I think others on staff can speak to that. I am very passionate about this. I have also raised several near miss tickets for Middlefield and Farley, which is also an intersection that is across the street from multiple schools. I have not seen traffic out there, would love to see you all out there, but specifically for what I raised for its ticket number 76,117. Specifically, I have that I raised through the police department on December 11th, have not heard back from. It's an infrastructure issue. I mean, it would be great to see police out there to control some of the speeding, but the road is, Wright Avenue is very wide. Polaris is very wide. There's lacking sidewalks, lacking crosswalks, lacking bike lanes. The stop sign is behind a tree. If those types of things are just not passed on because not everyone can report them, you are missing out on some incredibly valuable data and not hearing the voice of the residents of the city of Mountain View, and that is putting our safety at risk. I urge you to reconsider this decision. I will fill out the survey. I feel very frustrated in doing so, having been on the BFAC for 8 years and talking about near miss data for at least 2 years before that. So going on a decade of talking about how important this is. Thank you.
Valerie, I just wanted to verify, you said Wright and Polaris and Middlefield and Farley?
Correct. Those are intersections I walk on frequently. I've also been nearly hit quite frequently near the police station on Villa Avenue. I forget what that street is. It's the first street. If you're walking from Shoreline and Villa, the first cross street there, that's used by the police. There's lots of places where I get nearly hit walking around the town. And I try to file tickets whenever I can, and they really need to feed into the active transportation process.
Valerie, can you email me and let's try and see if we can figure out a way that we can have one place where we can collect this near miss data and see if we can add that to the dashboard. Because it sounds to me like
it's a queue in Ask Mountain View. That's where I've been submitting it for about the last, I think, 6 years.
Yeah, so those normally come to me and I haven't received any. I checked this morning. So if they're sent to another department because they don't think it's a police one, then I don't see them.
Well, I submitted ticket number 76,117 on December 11th. I can see it in Ask MV, no response. So I'm happy to email those to you.
Yeah, please.
We can
Please.
circle back to this
Yeah.
idea
Maybe we
with
can move
staff.
on to other comments.
Thank you, Valerie.
Any other public comments?
No more public
In
comments.
the room, any public comments? Okay, moving ahead to committee comments then. Any additional committee comments?
I have,
Michelle.
yes, I have a few comments. I guess how I will be using this data. First off, this is very nice. I like the dashboard. I think it's improvement on having static documents that you gotta go look in the archives for. I've done that and it's hard to do, but it's good that the data is there, and keeping the data there is important. So I'm glad that we're committed to that. And how I have used this data in the past and how I think people on this committee will often use this data is we are deciding. Sometimes we have a little bit of leeway on how we're going to do. Do we prefer this infrastructure project? Do we prefer this infrastructure project, right? Enforcement is important for safety, but infrastructure is also important, and having both you and we have access to the same data, we can kind of work towards a similar goal, which is the safety of the people in this city. And so the data that we're interested in is collision data, of course, but also anything else that might indicate that a place is unsafe or a poorly designed piece of infrastructure. So speeding data, ticket data definitely would be very interested to have. And near miss data, I understand that it's incomplete and it's unrepresentative, but like public comment is in a similar way unrepresentative. It's people who are passionate enough to come up and talk to us. And we don't dismiss it because we know it's not like a statistically significant part of the opinion of the city. People are taking time of their day to come and talk to us, and we value that. And people are taking the time to submit the near miss data. So I think it's useful to have the data. Some data, putting a disclaimer or it's good to be aware that it's not representative, but we would like to have that data, especially oftentimes we're making decisions with very little actual data to back it up. So you're kind of going by feel. So having more data is, in my opinion, always good. So that's my comments. Yes. And in that vein, when we have all that data, some way to maybe export or easily compare, because right now it's all very siloed by department, right? You've got your property kinds and your moving violations and your collision data is all in different tabs. And if we're trying to look at like what's all the data on this section of this street versus this section of that street to make a decision, having a way to export historical data or something into a like Excel or I don't know what would be a very useful feature to add on. That's my comment.
Thank you, Member Stone. Other committee comments?
Sure. So I wanted to echo, Commissioner Stone's comments. Sorry, not chairman anymore. That's great to have that tool, and I think that's very useful to the public and also to our committee. What I found more interesting in the visualizations is really when it comes to map, because to Commissioner Stone's point, that's really what can drive some of the areas of interest. Is it like a high injury net corridor, or is it a place where bikes get stolen a lot? Maybe we need to be more careful, put some lights near the bike locks and things like this. So the more data can be presented that way, the better, I think, because it's we can look at general trends over Mountain View, but I think for our work, that tends to be more about we have a project in that part of town or that corridor or things like this. And I had suggestions to on the map. You put the schools that are in Mountain View, and it's very important because it can lead to understanding if a route to school is safe or not. But as you probably know, a lot of kids in Mountain View, including my own, live in Mountain View but go to schools in Los Altos. So my ask would be to add to your map the schools in Los Altos that our kids go to. So that would be Los Altos High School, that would be Almond Elementary, Santa Rita, Egan. Because if you look at the heat map for the collisions, you see some clusters in the San Antonio area along Rengsdorf. For both these cases, the route to schools are actually into Los Altos, Los Altos High or schools in the Los Altos district. So I think it's an important data point to visualize for others. And that's all my comments.
Thank you. Member Thomas?
Yes, so I want to say that I appreciate the dashboard, and it's nice and it's informative. However, I feel like it is a step down from what we had in the past. So I would advocate for providing the data itself to BPAC for the purposes of this meeting other members might disagree. I think the dashboard's very nice, but I think it's also nice to have a record of things. So for example, not collisions, but when we had the spreadsheet of the bike thefts, that was really like seeing that list and seeing, was this bike actually registered, was it locked or unlocked and things like that. Like, yes, you could do a dashboard that like does it, but just seeing the instances, I think you can't compare any kind of visualization with, actually seeing the data. So I think both having something for the BPAC meetings, and then also I think for the public, it would be really nice for them to be able to export the data. It's Mountain View, lots of people love to visualize their own data. I think it would be a great resource. Like certainly for people who can't do their own visualizations or who don't want to go through a lot of data, I think the dashboard is great, like really great. But I think to really fully serve the public and also at least one BPAC member's needs, like having tabulated data that's detailed is the best. I wanted to second what Valerie Fenwick said. I also submitted a near miss report on December 20th. It was about an incident on December 18th. I was in a car on Shoreline and a little kid, it was like the last day of school before winter break, activated the pedestrian beacon. And I stopped, I was in the leftmost lane, and the kid was pushing their bike and entered the crosswalk. And in that moment, a car like basically drove all the way up to the crosswalk and then hit the brakes. I mean, this is like, stuff of nightmares. And I reported it and I didn't receive a reply. So I think that this is data that both needs to be accessible and also accessible as, as a list so we can see the individual instances, but also somehow incorporated into the dashboard because I think it is valuable to know. And then I just wanted to explain a little more, just like because COVID kind of scrambled everything, like for understanding traffic patterns, it is useful to look at the couple of years pre-COVID. And so I don't think it's as high priority as getting like the tabulated data, but I think it would be nice to backfill in some way or allow for a comparison or allow us to compare by making the data more munchable. And I think, yeah, that's it. Thanks very much.
Okay, Member Kuzma, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll reiterate Member Stone's comments, but I do really appreciate the dashboard. I think that for trying to, in any given moment, for trying to consume the data in a way that's actually understandable, I really like it, and I appreciate the responsiveness on, I know there were several comments made effectively comments made in the clarifying questions about like, oh, what does this mean, that then were improved before this meeting even happened. So I really appreciated that. The thing I will say about like having more exported data is that while I find for most use cases, and I think for getting the data out there and transparent, I think having the dashboard is really important. I do think there is for both the to the point about some members of the community are able and willing to do weird stuff with data. If there's some ready way to be able to export the underlying data, since I assume the underlying data is stuff that can be given to the public, given that there's a dashboard for it. If there's some way to reasonably provide an export button or the such, that would be amazing. I think the other side of that is that there is a bit in my mind of a record keeping thing. I'm glad we're committing to try to keep this dashboard consistent and the thing that is there for the next 10 years or whatever, but I'm cynical enough about nice dashboards that I've seen that I do sort of appreciate we have spreadsheets that I can, if I'm willing to go back and dig through the BPAC agendas for the past decade, I can't find them. Even if I can't collect them as easily into a single place. So I think that's where some of the desire for exporting data comes from. But I will say, I think this does more to actually expose the data to more people as it is. So it's sort of an additional request, I certainly wouldn't want to go back on this. Let's see. I think, and I wanted to opine briefly on what we should use this for. I definitely want to reiterate Member Stone's points about a lot of our goals are how do we make decisions about suggesting things for infrastructure or for enforcement. In that vein, one thing we want to do is know, are we on track for the Vision Zero goals we set? It might actually make sense to have a view that shows here's what the Vision Zero goals are, and here's the number of severe injury collisions or something per year. But if nothing else, just the fact we have this plot and I don't have to wait for the annual Vision Zero update report to get a plot of how many severe collision reports we've had in the year, I'm thrilled by that. The other thing in terms of sort of decision making is one thing I think we've struggled with figuring out how to provide useful input on as BPAC is what to ask for or not ask for from the police department. And so I've always tried to figure out how can I better understand how the police department works to better make suggestions based on our own experience. And sort of I think that's where some of my question about where parking dispatches or counts of tickets or locations of tickets sort of comes in. I sort of want to get a better feel for how is the police department spending its resources right now? Are we ending up with mostly tickets being written in a certain part of the city? Is it that the police department is so overloaded with property crimes or such that it's hard to spend time on traffic enforcement? And sort of that's where some of the I guess transparency comes in. I want to almost get a bit more of a view into how are resources being spent and where are they being spent, so that I can better comment on that. And better say oh yeah, this looks like what I would expect, and I just didn't know that the police department was doing what I wanted them to be doing the whole time. Or maybe it's oh, it looks like there's an opportunity for doing more here. Lieutenant, did you have something you were going to mention? Saw you unmuted.
Someone wanted to vacuum in here and I was like, 1 minute, please. Don't do that yet.
Okay.
Sorry. I wasn't sure if there's anything that needed to be said. So and on near misses. Yeah, it would be nice if there was a view of that. I'm very leery of using that data too much because of the issues with bias. I am also very leery of using data about number of calls for service or number of 911 calls for similar reasons, to be quite honest. But also I think that if we actually expose that data, it's easier to expose if there's a lot of near misses in this one neighborhood where there's not a lot of collisions, we can then ask the question, is that because we are not hearing about the collisions, or is that because there's a bias in the data? And I'd rather be having that conversation than not have the data. So if it's reasonable to get that near miss data exposed, I think that would be good. It's hard for me to even evaluate how valuable that data would be right now, because I don't actually know how much of it's heavily biased versus actually useful. So I think that's about all I had.
Sorry, I had.
Member Demick, go ahead.
Yes, just for the near miss data, about a week ago or 2 weeks ago, the principal of Mountain View High School emailed all the parents asking them to report near misses around the schools. So at least some people think or believe that this data would make a difference. And I think it would both be good for people who do report. I mean, if there's some kind of error that these things are not getting through, I think it would be really good to resolve them. But then also that it's not all for naught, that if, for example, lots of people report scary stuff happening, I mean, the traffic, scary stuff happening around the school, that then this input is used somehow and recorded. Thanks.
Monday.
Based on the discussion on near misses and also, you know, collecting data that may not be perfect, I'm wondering to what extent the city of Mountain View and the police department is considering leveraging technology, specifically cameras, to kind of you know, get a better idea on this. You know, there was an example that was mentioned by
So that may not be an agenda item as far as.
well, this is a way to
policy.
get better data, so, you know, so.
Yeah, I think we're talking about reporting data now. Maybe we should come back to.
I think it's up to you.
Okay, yeah, I think in the interest of focusing on
Okay.
displaying and reporting the data we
Okay,
have
so-
versus generating more data, we should limit that discussion.
Was it a question?
Well,
Like a suggestion?
yeah,
You're
So,
saying,
so we have seen the use of cameras for understanding collisions and near misses. So for example, on the interchange of 237 and Middlefield, there was a really good analysis. I think that VTA sponsored that work. And so, but it's not something that we actively do. It's just on.
because that would be, I mean, from experience, a good way to
Mhm.
Yeah,
to get good data, so.
so to summarize, you're requesting the city consider.
Yeah, because we have cameras, right? So, you know, yeah, you see them at many intersections, and to me, you know, based on my background, it's like, when it's, you know, we have data there, we just need to get it out, so.
So I'll finish without further comments. So I think there's two veins, and I'd like to echo both of them. So data is not perfect. We know not all collisions are reported. You can see signs or hydrants knocked over, and there's no a vehicle flees, and sometimes it's never reported. It lays there for a considerable time. So not all collisions are reported. Certainly not all violations are ticketed. And yes, not all near misses are reported. So they're all imperfect data and not complete, and agreeing with Lieutenant Maldonado, none of them are complete. But until, as Member Kuzmal said, that we can show a bias or a reason that the data is not valid and not useful, I think we should try to use the data we have, and the near miss data reported through Ask Mountain View appears to be the vehicle to do that. So I would echo that if we can incorporate that data, and yes, it's not complete or perfect, but it does have some indication of something happening, that would be useful to the feedback. The other comment I would like to make is endorse the idea of allowing exports. So the displays are excellent at answering and make it easy to answer the questions that you can pose against the displays, and that's some large majority of it, whether it's 50, 70%. But the more trickier questions, and even understanding if there's bias in data or answering questions that haven't been asked, the ability to export that data and sort it and accumulate it in different ways, and perhaps combine it with other city data available in TIMS might answer other questions. So we had the question, has Mountain View been lucky not having DUI bike collisions? Or does Mountain View have fewer nighttime bike riders? We don't know. We might compare that to other cities with the reports in TIMS, for instance, with our data, and see, looks like it's just an anomaly, and we can expect that to change and average out over time. And if Sunnyvale and Palo Alto, for instance, have much higher numbers. So I think the idea of an export for the raw data, and let those with the skills to tease out more difficult answers to questions that aren't directly asked by type of displays would be useful. Okay, that concludes my comment. Okay, not seeing any other comments. I think I'd like to express appreciation for the investment in the police department to get the report here, and for your support and explanation of the work you're doing, and endorsement to move forward with the roadmap and consider the comments we've made.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us. look forward to working with you. Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay, going on to our next item. You can display up. I believe we are on to item 6.3, transportation demand management, and we have a report from city staff.
Here.
Right there. Mhm.
Oh,
There's two kind of.
Great. Good evening, VPAC members. I'm Ben Pacho, Transportation Planner in the Public Works Department. It's great to be back before you tonight and update you all on important project milestones. I'll also note that Diana Pencholi, the city's principal planner, is also here representing city staff on the project, and joining us virtually. We have our consultant team members, Julia Ween, associate at Steer Group, and Natalie McCarville, senior consultant also with Steer. As a refresher, City Council identified developing a citywide ordinance as a strategic priority in fiscal years 2023 to 2025. The basis for TDM in Mountain View was first established in the 2030 general plan, and would later inform the specific TDM provisions that are currently required in the city's precise plans and sustainability action plans. Reviewing the project's work plan, staff is in the current project phase focused on developing the ordinance framework, seen there in blue. We previously brought the project vision and goals to BPAC in Q4 2023, where members had voiced their support for the project's objectives. Particularly, BPAC encouraged staff to focus on developing measurable goals and robust mechanisms for enforcement. Members were also interested in exploring ways reductions in vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions could also be achieved through the project. Next steps include finalizing the framework elements in late spring, and staff will then begin work on drafting ordinance language for council adoption in Q4 of 2025. Over the course of the project, staff has engaged a number of key stakeholders and advisory bodies to gain a broad understanding of current practice with TDM, as well as how requirements can be further streamlined and made more effective through the ordinance. For example, key insights were gathered from the Downtown Business Association and the TMA, including a host of one-on-one interviews with developers, employers, property managers, and community members. At last week's community workshop, members of the public expressed support for on-demand services like microtransit, and also exploring potential cash incentives that could increase active transportation like bike commuting to workplaces in lieu of driving. Collectively, the input gathered thus far has been used to guide the direction of the project, including its vision and goals and the TDM framework. To remind everyone, staff presented the project's vision to BPAC in Q4 2023, where the TDM ordinance will seek to reduce single occupancy vehicle trips for new development and increase use of multimodal transportation alternatives that are sustainable, equitable, effective, and respond to changing demands. The goal of the project is outlined at the bottom, or informed by existing conditions analysis and stakeholder input to ensure that the ordinance focuses on predictability and effectiveness. while also increasing sustainable mobility options that are equitable. Most notably, the project vision helped guide development of the TDM framework, and the various framework elements can be distilled into 3 key policy areas, including applicability at the top. This touches on who will be required to comply and what criteria used to screen projects subject to the ordinance. Secondly, requirements, as seen in the second row. This section concerns what key metrics projects will be subject to for compliance purposes, as well as how they will demonstrate their intent to comply by submitting a TDM plan. And then at thirdly, the bottom, monitoring and enforcement. This addresses how staff and key stakeholders will effectively monitor the ongoing effectiveness of TDM performance, as well as consider enforcement mechanisms to support compliance. At a high level, the TDM framework seeks to operationalize TDM requirements across a project's lifespan, from the entitlement phase when a project is sponsored by a developer to the post-occupancy phase to the right, when the city later certifies new buildings are ready for occupancy. So moving from left to right, initial projects will be analyzed based on trip generation assumptions and estimated ADT, and be required to mitigate vehicle trips by adopting a TDM plan. 1 year post-occupancy, property owners will be required to submit annual TDM reports that will attest to their compliance with ADT targets or face potential penalties assessed by the city for non-compliance. Okay, so we'll start at the very beginning. We'll first discuss project applicability. So the TDM ordinance, once adopted, will apply to new projects seeking entitlements by discretionary approval from City Council. Projects will be reviewed on the basis of expected trip generation assumptions and potential to generate over 200 plus average daily trips. Such project review is consistent with the city's VMT policy and multimodal handbook. Additionally, the current regulatory environment is such that state and regional laws require employers with more than 50 plus employees to provide TDM resources. This kind of looks like commuter benefits as well as parking cash out incentives. So it's intended that the TDM ordinance will support these employers in meeting those requirements at the state and regional level. Additionally, it's important to note that TDM requirements under the ordinance will fall to the landowner and run with the land as may be triggered by a change of ownership in the case of sale. Okay. And then question 2 addresses what land use categories will be subject to the ordinance. This may include multifamily residential, non-residential projects anticipated to generate over 200 average daily trips. For typical non-residential projects seeking entitlement, that may look like office, medical, retail, restaurants, industrial, and manufacturing. And then for mixed use there on the right, we've considered an exemption. So for a mixed use residential project that proposes retail space of less than 50,000 square feet, those projects be exempt. So to be consistent with the city's VMT screening process. Question 3, what size of projects will be required to comply? Staff with project consultants have used standard trip generation rates to estimate average daily trip volumes based on project sizes and land uses. For example, small projects typically fall within 200 to 499 average daily trips, 500 to 999 ADT for medium-sized projects, and 1,000 plus ADT for large projects. These trip generation assumptions by project size are consistent with the city's existing MTA handbook and VMT policy that are used for assessing transportation impacts for new development. So question 4, what TDM performance metrics will apply? So the shift from peak hour trips to average daily trips does mark a shift in policy. The virtues of peak hour trips was initially grounded in its focus on mitigating traffic and congestion. during peak times, ultimately to increase automobile throughput when demand is highest in the transportation network. So in using average daily trips as a metric, we've noted that this can capture trips beyond peak times, perhaps better reflecting changes in travel behavior post-COVID. And a focus on ADT is also more suited to reducing total VMT and associated greenhouse gas emissions in line with citywide goals and plans and policies. Question 5, what thresholds will determine compliance? So projects will be required to implement TDM strategies that reduce ADT to the following levels. So 30% reduction in ADT for small projects, 40% for medium projects, and 50% ADT reduction for large projects. And these are all relative to ITE trip generation rates. It's also to note, formulating these trip reduction targets, these were informed by the city's existing precise plan targets, as well as an analysis of best case studies of similar TDM programs in San Francisco, Redwood City, San Mateo County, and San Jose. So question 6, prior to entitlement, prospective applicants will be required to submit a TDM plan for city review. Specifics of the TDM plan will then be included in the conditions of approval preceding adoption by council. In this proposed framework, TDM plans will be comprised of 3 types of strategies. So the first one, mandatory strategies. These provide the supportive structure necessary to implement TDM. And core strategies, they're in the middle. These will offer an array of flexible, proven trip reduction levels of effectiveness that applicants may select from to develop the project's TDM plan. And then they're on the farthest right, auxiliary strategies. While not effective on their own as standalone strategies, these are essential for implementing the core strategies and overall success of the TDM plan. And this is just kind of a snapshot, high-level review of what I just discussed. This chart gives a sense of the range of strategies across project sizes. And then as an important programming note, the attachment to this report does include a robust list of TDM strategies and their estimated level of effectiveness, with particular attention to the core strategies. And it's also important to note that moving left to right for small, medium projects, all will be required to select the requisite number of ADT reduction strategies to meet their target. And then the numbers for auxiliary strategies required will increase, moving from small to large. Okay, now moving into the monitoring elements of the framework. This slide illustrates the various reporting activities that projects are responsible for, which are organized based on project size. So as you'll note, the burden of monitoring activities is less for smaller projects. And this reflects feedback that staff has received, given that smaller projects typically have fewer resources to comply with ongoing monitoring activities. And then monitoring and enforcement continued. So to support compliance efforts, staff has proposed pathways towards enforcement on account of projects failing to either provide the required reporting or meeting the required ADT targets based on project size. So note, as I noted in the staff report, small projects will not be assessed a penalty for not achieving a 30% ADT reduction. And that's reflective of the feedback that we've also received from small projects that the proportion of impacts may not be equal to the size of the penalty. So therefore, we've exempted small projects from penalty. And then, let's see. So question 8, what enforcement mechanisms will be available? So the proposed penalty structure reflects existing practices which have been imposed on projects already entitled. So furthermore, the penalties will apply based on project size and will be in proportion with the level of non-compliance with the ADP target. And I just want to note that staff is currently working on an alternative methodology for assessing penalties that looks at a cost per trip rate as opposed to a percent of under the ADT target. Okay, so for next steps, following tonight's BVAC meeting and the input gathered, staff will present the recommended framework to EPC next month and CTC in March, culminating in a council study session in June. And then upon finalizing the TDM framework in spring, staff will set about drafting ordinance language for council adoption by the end of this year, tentatively scheduled for end of this year. This ends my formal presentation and move us on to BPAC discussion questions, which I've listed here. So does BPAC concur with staff recommendations on ordinance framework, specifically doing performance metrics and thresholds, TDM strategies and ordinance management strategies? Then also, does BPAC have additional feedback on the draft TDM framework? And then I'll just mention that our 2 project consultants, Julian Ween and Natalie McCarville, are also here available on the call to field questions from BPAC. Thank you. Oh, sorry. As a programming note, the next slide shows, yeah, you want to just shows the TDM strategies in a more exhaustive sense is what the TDM toolkit will have. So we could just refer to that if you have any questions on the attachment included in the report. You can go back to the
Okay, we can leave that slide up. I think the prior slide perhaps, or alternate periodically between.
5 seconds on each.
Yeah, I think that was more relevant.
Okay, clarifying questions from the committee. Hand member
Yeah.
Guzman, okay,
Yes.
go ahead.
I guess first I'll just logistically, when if at all, should we next expect BPAC to hear about this item, or when would it next show before us, or is this our last chance to comment before it ends up as a final ordinance?
It's my understanding that staff will wrap up the ordinance framework after the council study session in June. So that will then begin the work on drafting ordinance language. So we wouldn't go back to BPAC necessarily for the ordinance language, as the purview of the ordinance touches more so on land use. We would need to go to EPC and then council for adoption.
Okay. The next question I had, which I was realizing I had forgotten to ask in the clarifying questions, was do we have any somewhat concrete sense of the costs that the various aspects of this would impose on the projects? Like, obviously projects typically have to have someone who manages stuff. I don't know if that's typically one person who ends up spending a couple hours a month getting some report in, or if that's a really onerous activity typically, or with like driveway counts. I have no sense of if that's the company spends a few $1,000s for a camera that does driveway counts, or if that's someone is sitting out there every day checking off cars. So I guess are there any approximate cost estimates of the impacts of these things?
We do include some gradation of effectiveness in the TDM toolkit. So based on the range of effectiveness for trip reduction, it's scaled to the amount of subsidy provided. So if you wanted to, let's say, provide a transit subsidy for the first 3 years of a project, 5 years of a project at 50%, 60%, that helps projects gauge what potential costs could be. But we tried to scale the needed requirements based on the ADT reduction required, so that smaller projects wouldn't be overburdened by having to take on too much mitigation of the project, so that proportionally larger and medium-sized projects would have to select more core strategies in order to mitigate transportation impacts.
Maybe I can respond also. So I think that there are strategies that are, and it also depends on the size of the organization.
Yeah.
So there are strategies that are distributed among a wide number of people. And if it's a
Yeah.
large organization, the cost is small per person.
Yeah.
So for example, transportation coordinator, that's something that happens routinely. Typically, you only see the large companies have shuttles
Yeah.
because running shuttles is very expensive. And then there are some of these strategies where they're generating some kind of there can be some kind of value capture within the organization. For example, if they implement parking cash out, there may be a relationship to the amount of parking garages that they need to build. So, you know, that may not be a cost if you calculate, depending on how you calculate it.
Yeah, I think those are relevant, and I guess part of what I was asking, the one that is less clear to me is more specifically for the basically administrative items, the transportation coordinator and such as, yes, I'm sure the transportation coordinator is more of a job for a larger organization than a smaller one. But basically the things like that and driveway counts,
They're quite nominal.
Okay.
Yeah, the costs of those are very low.
Okay.
Yeah.
Typically in smaller organizations, admin staff will pick up the TDM coordinator role.
Yeah.
Okay. Or they could request assistance from the TMA, which could provide support in implementing TDM. So that's something we're coordinating on the TMA on.
And I assume that sort of thing is also what you've been going back and forth, like when talking to the business associations and the what such about.
Right. Is understanding the barriers, the transportation barriers for smaller organizations.
Okay.
And the unique needs of the small and medium projects as opposed to large.
Okay.
I will also add, Diana Pincholi, principal planner, that for medium and large projects, this also helps them to mitigate with their vehicle miles travel impacts. So actually the cost will be built into the project and getting the project entitled as well.
Yeah. And the next question I had may also be relevant for you, which is that there was a mention about what categories of projects this even applies to. I know there's the size threshold, but there's also it has to be something that's getting entitlements. Can you help me understand if is there a category of project that tends to happen in the city where this would not apply to, or is that just being very precise about the language in the memo?
So that's a very good question. I think there's a way that, we're looking at the net new trips.
Yeah.
And that's where the ADT framework was actually accepted or considered, is the fact that, if your net new trips are not that much, then you don't need to apply. You will not be applied to this TDM. Like if you are an office of this scale and you're just replacing it with the same one, then you're not creating new trips. Correct?
Right. So we try to align this grading process to as closely as possible to our VMT policy. So the way that projects are screened. However, there are exemptions in the VMT policy for projects that are close to transit, for example, or housing developments. And there are some cases where the team ordinance would still apply to those projects that are screened out from VMT based on ADT if their transportation impacts are significant and they generate ADT significant over 200, then there would need to be some level of mitigation
So
required.
it's all tied to how many trips that you're generating. And then there are smaller projects that we see, facade improvements, or somebody's just coming in with small TI and basically doing the signages and just moving in. Those projects will not have to do that.
Okay, those are helpful. The language I was actually getting at was, and this may have been how transportation planner Pacho was saying it, that just caught my ear, was are there projects that don't, this applies to projects that go through the entitlement process.
Correct.
Are there projects that don't go through the entitlement process?
Yes.
Is there a specific example that?
I don't have a specific example. I just heard
Somebody
if
just
this
said-
applies to projects where this happens, that made me ask, are there projects that are of significant size where that doesn't apply? Because I don't know.
Usually we don't see that. They will be trying to do something in order to, you know, move into the space
Yeah.
and accommodate to their
Okay.
business needs. So usually it is like that, yeah.
Okay, so it was not something to worry
We've
too.
seen scenarios where where projects that we've needed to apply exemptions to projects based on TDM because of state law or that are kind of preempted. So whether it's like the builder's remedy project or SB 330 projects.
Or, yeah, 100% affordable housing coming in with density bonus, they can ask for a waiver from complying with the city ordinance, causing a, you know, financial hardship on the project. But that is all built in as, you know, there are some state laws that can give them a caveat.
And this is something internally that we're discussing is how do we understand the current regulatory environment and ways the ordinance will apply and not.
Most of those scale of projects, we will have to go through CEQA, where we'll be reviewing the trip generations and stuff to see if there are any traffic impacts coming from theirs, which will then help them to propose a TDM program.
Thank you. I think that's all I had on that question. The point about location, I was wondering if the ITE trip generation like baseline that's being used for these projects, does that produce a different baseline depending on where you build the exact same buildings? Like if you build a building, the exact same physical building near a transit stop versus far away from transit, the default state will be that it produces less VMT. Is that something that is captured in the ITE baseline or not?
Right, so I'll invite the project consultants to jump in if I miss anything, but the TDM toolkit provides, again, an estimation of the levels of effectiveness for trip reduction, and they were scaled to VTA's VMT tools. So they are site specific and geographic specific to Mountain View context, but applicants will also have the option to provide alternative analysis and methodologies for assessing trip generation assumptions. Whether it's ITE, whether it's guidance from OPR or Office of Planning Research at the state level or CAPCOA. So the toolkit is to give you a sense of where the range typically falls, specifically for Mountain View using VTA's VMT tool. That is site specific, but there can be supplemental methodologies can be used to support that if, you know, if they want to either verify the accuracy or effectiveness of these reduction strategies.
I may need to follow up, sorry.
So is the question, the number itself, is it kind of based on location? And the answer is no. So the location would come into effect as part of the, say if they're using the VMT tool, then they get benefit from their location.
Let me, this may have come into comment, well, this will lead into comments depending on the answer to this question. I'll just point out, defer it, but this, in order to clarify that, the question or concern I have is a situation where you have two identical projects and one is being built near transit, one is not. Mm-hmm. Will that project that's being built near transit basically have to, that project that's being built near transit presumably is already by building near transit going to have lower VMT?
Yeah.
Are they rewarded for that under this
Yeah.
framework?
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, because if they would both have the same baseline that they're operating off of, then the fact they have to do less to get to their target effectively rewards them. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. That's what I was hoping to hear.
Clarifying question?
Oh shoot, maybe I have more questions. I forgot. I think on parking supply restrictions, there are now multiple areas of the cities that do not have parking minimums. I know the ordinance, or not the ordinance, the memo mentioned using either the city ordinances or the whichever parking supply thing it referenced. I apologize, I can't remember which thing. So is it the case that if someone is building a new project in an area with no parking minimums, they can still get benefit from providing very little parking in their project? They get credit towards the TDM ordinance if they do not, if they build very little parking? Is that an accurate assessment of the current proposal?
So I mean, AB 2097, I'm thinking, right, exempts projects close to transit from not providing or meeting minimum parking requirements.
Yeah.
So in that case, it would cancel out. They wouldn't be able to select.
So they would not be able to select,
It's my
do
understanding.
that as a core strategy?
That's correct.
Okay, and so any project that gets built in either, in any of the precise plans where there's 0 parking minimums or in the AB 297 areas.
I
can't use
mean,
that
we're
strategy.
thinking of more restrictive areas like North Bay Shore that has
Those parking maximums, right?
parking
We
maximums.
also recently adopted ordinances to implement our housing element goal.
Yeah.
To remove parking minimums from East Wisman, El Camino,
Right.
San Antonio, downtown.
We repealed those, yeah.
Okay. Might have comments on that. And I guess sort of in terms of how will this, once we get the ordinance implemented, what is the city's sort of monitoring of the efficacy of the ordinance itself going to be like? Like, there's things in here about how do we keep an eye on the individual projects? What is the city's ongoing maintenance burden when we have somebody who's like reporting back to EPC or someone regularly saying, here's how things are going, here's tweaks we want to make? Is it going to be just set it and forget?
I mean, there's a bit of manual processing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just essentially me imposing TDM requirements. So to the extent that we can automate some of this, I think will help us scale the program.
Yeah.
And so we've seen other jurisdictions like City of Cambridge that are using platforms which support both end users and city staff, in that it creates checklists for projects to comply and help determine, off the bat, whether or not they met their ADT, targets and whether the necessary reporting has been submitted. So to the extent that that is automated, that gives staff a sense of where to focus energy and compliance and where to follow up, that will help scale projects effectively. It's just right now it's, a lot of things are bespoke. A lot of TDM reports are bespoke.
Yeah.
Various consultants usually do these TDM reports. So to the extent that we can create and standardize and make transparent a lot of these requirements will help us, again, like be able to track what we're not able to right now because everything is so specific to various sites.
Okay.
Yeah, our applicants also provide us that feedback very often, like, how this can be complicated. It helps staff to standardize things. It helps the applicants as well, standardize things and provide better customer service. And then I think the other part of it is that, we want to keep it as a document where we can go back and update it later on when new state-of-art strategies come out, which we have not thought about yet. We'll keep ourselves up to date in the TDM world.
Thank you. That's actually all the questions I had written down for myself to ask.
Member Stone?
Yeah, so I did have one question about the IT raise. You mentioned that's not the only metric you're using, but that was the metric in the report, and I was trying to look those up, and it costs money. So will applicants have access to that data, or will they also, everybody needs to buy access to the IT generation manual to apply for a project in the city of Mountain View?
So usually they have TDM consultants who actually prepare a report for them, which have access to that.
Okay.
So that's a usual practice that is being done right now.
And also the traffic engineers, so that they have to generate the number initially. But the VMT tool from VTA is very helpful in that it incorporates a lot of that data inside the tool and you can just plug it in as a member of the public.
That's cool. So is the IT data raw trips or is it VMT? Like what number do you get from that van?
Those are just trips.
It's observation. So industry-wide, it's
So
trip
the
counts.
VTA tool is what turned that into VMT?
It looks at site
Or
specific.
how are people taking this number of trips? Because, a trip is not a mile.
Yes. So the trips are used to figure out if they are required to comply.
Okay,
And then we focus on VMT and AD, average daily trips from there on. in
okay,
terms
but
of
where does
reductions.
where does the number they're trying to reduce come from? Because I thought that was coming from ITE. So you're saying a 30%
So,
reduction?
Yes, so ITE provides trips, it can provide trips on a daily basis or on an hourly basis, like peak hour. So we can get that from the initial analysis.
Right, but then you've got a number of trips, but the number we're requiring them to have 30% less
Mhm.
VMT. So what is 30% less than what? It's not the ITE number. What number is that?
I thought it was 30, reports that there's some less.
Yeah, it's the number that
ADT.
has been generated for that development. So that would require like a traffic engineer or someone to,
Okay, so who is generating the baseline?
it would be like the traffic consultant for the development.
Okay,
Yeah.
Typically, when to comply with CEQA requirements, projects of various sizes will need to do an environmental impact assessment, and it includes transportation
okay,
impacts.
so they're calculating that V.
So they're calculating that it's standard practice for projects to provide
So
that
I could go look
information.
at some projects,
Mhm.
secret report, and find that number if I was bored.
Mhm.
Okay, that was my question.
Thank you. Member Namik?
Yes, I was wondering about the VTA Equitable VMT mitigation program. In it, it has like a bank that developers can pay into for things that would kind of benefit the whole city, or I guess in that case, it's the county by investing in transit and bike infrastructure, et cetera. So is that a possibility then in the future? What does it mean, VTA Equitable VMT future?
Great question. We wanted to include that as a placeholder because it's still very much in development. So VTA just issued their final report, which kind of goes into the various strategies that they're proposing and what would need to happen next. Jurisdictions would need to opt into the program. So that is an important milestone for the project. They haven't asked jurisdictions yet, but if there is a critical mass, there could be an instance where the program or project collapses just because there isn't enough interest from jurisdictions to want to opt in. But if there is significant interest from the county, there is, discussion on setting up a bank. And so for projects that are thumbing through the TDM toolkit, if they wanted to opt in a more regional reduction strategy, they can either select what VT is proposing. So I believe it's van pool subsidies, it's bus speed improvements, and it's e-bike subsidies. So those are all associated with some level of trip reduction effectiveness. So that can count towards them meeting their ADT reduction. But as far as the administrative structure supporting that has yet to be worked out. That's why it's just kind of there as a placeholder.
And why did Mountain View not consider that? As far as I understand it, for like Arc Space or something like that, a developer could pay to offset, like they don't provide the green space, but they give the city money to, for parks and so on. Why was this not considered for Mountain View?
I can respond to that. I think one of the main thing is that our goal here is to have people comply and reduce trips. And when it's offset, like it's an in lieu fee, then it takes time for the city to implement that program. There's a delay in the reduction in trips. So our goal is not to collect money for us to do projects on their behalf. Our goal is for each of the developers to comply with the reductions in trip generation.
Okay, and then on that note of money, where does the money go from fines? Say you ever fine someone for not, is it earmarked for transit and?
We need to still figure that part out.
Existing additions have it earmarked to go to the city towards implementing TDM measures at a regional level or city level. It also is earmarked to go to the TMA in providing TDM services. So there's multiple endpoints, but that all needs to be shored up in the process part of the project.
Thanks.
Okay.
Sure. So I had a question about the more like the land use and the rules. My understanding is that there are some projects that are exempt from CEQA. So does it mean they would be de facto exempt from the calculation and from the TDM, or?
And that's a great question. So Dana can help me out with this, but there are a number of criteria set for VMT screening that projects could be exempt by, which again, if it's within an area of transit-oriented development, it could be exempted. If it's low density of housing, right, it could be exempted. And what was the third one?
Low parking as well.
Low parking as well. So that could reduce the burden on projects by being screened out from VMT, but solely based on the transportation impact analysis, if they are generating significant ADT, upwards of 200, they could potentially be required to adopt a TDM plan and mitigate at a certain level.
So they have to do that calculation regardless of CEQA, I guess.
Right.
That's what I wasn't clear.
Because
from
typically, right, projects will need to provide studies in tandem with VMT studies, but also the city's own required multimodal transportation analysis handbook. And that's a screening of what the overall impacts are to the transportation network, not just by automobile traffic, but all modes. And so typically an MTA would require some kind of impact analysis of transportation.
And they both use the same source of trip generation.
Okay.
We use the same number
Yeah.
to do the MTA and the VMT analysis as well.
But being exempt from CEQA doesn't mean being exempt from.
Right,
that.
it's on a get out of
That's what I
jail.
wanted to clarify, so. Second question is if a project is an extension of an existing use. So for instance, we have two recent examples at San Francisco High School and El Camino Hospital, where, you know, that definitely has generated more more traffic. And it was before that. I mean, so would the TDM apply to the extension or the effect of the extension?
Yes, the net new trips.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe St. Francis recently had an expansion, and so they had needed to provide a TDM plan to account
Okay.
for
Also
that
did apply to them.
expansion. Yeah, that was following after the certificate of occupancy they received for that annex. So
And then I guess there are some existing TDMs, you know, in Mountain View with things. So what's the degree of comfort that the city has with the counts that are provided and the reporting? And has the city ever triggered a fee or some sanctions on a non-compliant TDM? So
No, not yet. We have been following up with various developers. I think that they've almost all been responsive, right? And that a couple of them have required a bit more kind of hand-holding in the process to figure out how to do their TDM reporting, but so far, so
I'll
good.
say the penalty is a option of last resort. It's the last thing the city wants to do. We really want to encourage projects to meet not just city goals, but their own goals in reducing VMT. And so we tend to be more supportive and understanding, you know, what needs they might be experiencing and how we can provide a supportive role and meeting whatever gaps, you know, for meeting the requirements, but we have not assessed the penalty yet.
and are the reporting, and does the city view the reporting as truthful or kind of, I don't know, maybe not, because that's kind of self-reporting and,
Right.
and you know, that's
So in our current practice of TDM requirements, we typically require that projects hire an outside third-party consultant to verify the driveway counts. So, you know, an account that they can't do their own homework and grade it. So they have to get a third-party independent to verify. And then typically project sites will collect their raw data and then they'll give it to a consultant to kind of synthesize and process and write up the report.
But at the moment, each company does it their own way. And
Sure,
so
sure.
it is quite time consuming to dig through and really understand if they're in
And
compliance.
some are more forthcoming with data than others, so
Yes.
it's hard when it's not standardized.
So we kind of trust
We,
what they provide or.
we have local consultants who we work with on a regular basis who are hired for this sole purpose,
Mhm.
who we can trust
Mhm.
are doing, accurate accounting.
And then my last question is on the list of strategies here. Is it cast in stone or is it something you would want feedback on?
Great, so what Diana mentioned, this is meant to be a living document. So naturally, TDM strategies will fall out of practice based on changing travel behaviors, and some will become more favored, more cost-effective, more popular. So this is meant to be updated on a regular basis, and as well as measuring their levels of effectiveness. So this is kind of, a resource for our developer communities to understand how they can meet requirements flexibly and reasonably over time.
I go back to the question. Yes, back to the question.
Is that all the committee clarifying questions?
What came up?
Can we go through them quickly?
Hopefully, yes, so I will make it reasonably. But first off, it came, dear member Stone's questions, there's a question about a ambiguity about whether things are referring to ADT or VMT. My understanding of the reading of the report was that all the percent reductions and percent targets in the proposed ordinance would use daily trip counts. It is not explicitly tracking or trying to measure against VMT, although there are references to VMT programs. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Just making absolutely sure that was clear. Secondly, I think this may have been brought up last time this was here. Is there any pathway or is there any desire from existing people with DDM programs to transition into the new DDM program? Or is there going to be a pathway to that if people would find this easier to administer? Or is that just something that's not a concern?
I can start, you can add. Legally, I think it's a little bit difficult.
Okay.
We have not found in working with our consultants a legal path to do this yet. And we have also not heard from any of the stakeholders we have done the outreach to, who have come forth and said we would be very much interested to dial into a new TDM program.
Okay. And the somewhat technical clarifying question is on the limit parking supply option. There's something about not having, or about it being an area that doesn't have free or restricted or unrestricted something street parking. Can you clarify what that means?
I believe, and the consultants can clarify this, was that the true value of the measure depends on the level of restriction of parking and it being paid for parking, is that right?
I can jump in, Ben. That's correct. So, charging for parking when free parking is readily available a block away is going to be less impactful in terms of trip reduction than it would be if parking is difficult, if there are residential parking zones, for example, surrounding a new project site that makes off-site parking more difficult. And just to flag here too, on some of these descriptions in the attachment that we put forward, the description comes directly from the VTA tool as well, because we're using their methodology to determine the reduction. So we're sort of using their terminology, but appreciate flags for areas where the language is maybe a little bit confusing, and we can try to make sure we're clarifying that on top of what the VTA tool does.
And so is the idea that then the parking supply one would not be a strict binary, or would it, like, I just want to make sure, am I understood, I interpret this as if there's free parking on the street in that area, then that program won't apply at all? Or is it that it will apply with some judgment applied?
So I think the toolkit provides ballpark percentage reductions based on the conditions of the research. And so and also the VMT toolkit does the same thing. So yeah, if you dial down the dollar amount in the surrounding area, then the impact also dies down.
And I think, in terms of applicability and how this would be used in real life, there's, as Ben and Diana mentioned earlier, the way that it's written right now is really for areas where there isn't abundant free parking. If there was a project that had abundant free parking but wanted to explore the use of parking charging, the city's open to discussing what that reduction could look like and working with projects to make sure that there's an appropriate reduction applied to their project for that strategy.
I think those are all the extra questions I had.
Okay, so the only one clarifying question, the city has no isolated charge for parking at this point.
Correct.
So basically it's either free, or if there's a charge, there's adjacent free parking.
Oh, I guess the exception is our permit parking. So for the monthly permits.
Right, but I mean, there's adjacent free
Yes,
parking.
yes.
Okay, no further clarifying questions. Can we go to comments from members of the public?
No one has their hand raised.
Okay, anyone in the room, public comment? Thank you. Going to committee comments then. If we could just go through one time, keep us on track a little bit.
Such a harsh new chair.
Ready to start? Member Stone?
I'm happy to start. Okay. So in my reading, which I did maybe a little bit more than is healthy on this item, it took me to the latest CAPCOA report, which came out October of last year. So it's brand spanking new. Updates of the 2010 version, which I also read. And what this has me thinking about. So some of the most effective strategies. First off, it's good. It's got actual formulas in there that might be useful to people. Like if you increase this number, then we can expect this much of a reduction in DMT, and this is the research it's done. It's also very long. But some of the stuff in here, so like, for example, some of the most effective, according to this document, strategies for reducing DMT are things like increasing residential density, creating it near transit, including affordable or BMR units in your development. Those are also going to go into the calculation of the baseline, right? Unless I'm wrong, right? So when you are creating your impact report, you're going to take into account when you're calculating how much travel, if it's close to transit, and if it's including BMR units.
In terms of the proximity to transit, that would not be in the baseline.
No.
No, so it would be like the average, I guess, is a national number, irrespective of
Okay, so I'm misunderstanding it. Because what I'm worried about is accidentally disincentivizing development that actually is going to reduce TDM. Okay. Do you have a?
Julia, did you have a response?
Just to add, I think, and making sure that we're using the term baseline the same way, because I'm wondering if you're talking about baseline for sort of project level ADT that their reductions are coming off of. And then Ria, it sounds like you may be talking about baseline for the reduction for each strategy. And so if that's correct, the baseline for each site's average daily trips that we're, trying to reduce from would be incorporating, project characteristics. So they would be getting, they'd be starting from a lower number of trips from the beginning.
Right, like, high density, low BMR, mixed use, near transit site will have.
Right,
Lower.
but per Ria's notes, we're not giving more credit for strategy level reduction for sites that are closer to transit or have those characteristics. So it's coming in that initial ADT determination that's happening at that, sort of first initial stage, but not subsequently when we're selecting strategies.
Okay. I guess my concern is that that might end up creating more development that has higher expected initial number so that it's easier for them to reduce that. I would like to see some credit. Maybe this is not the right place, or maybe it is, for according to this report, these are some of the most effective strategies for reducing VMT is things like building your stuff near transit, building it more density, mixing income, mixing uses. Right. So I'm concerned about accidentally disincentivizing that development. That's I guess that's top of my mind. And parking is another one where we might see some unintended consequences. For example, we're talking about like unbundled parking is required right now, but there's an exception for if the garage is in the house, right? And that might be pushing more towards row homes rather than some other kinds of developments, and people have mixed feelings about row homes. But yeah, so that's another kind of unintended consequence or carve out. You can't charge for parking for row homes because it's your garage. Like that strategy doesn't apply either. I don't know. That's my main concern. Did I write anything else out? Since I only get one shot of this. Yeah, I guess the other thing is on that, like adding like neighborhood retail, for example, in an part of the city that doesn't have any, is going to reduce probably VMT. Even if it doesn't reduce trip counts, people are going to be coming from the neighborhood, maybe driving shorter distances. I don't know if it's easy to capture this. I guess I should start with, I like that you're building off existing rules and metrics as much as possible to kind of make this easier. And it's a good program. I think it's worth doing. But yeah, my main concern is, are we disincentivizing or incentivizing certain kinds of development, which on a macro scale, it might make more sense, or we might actually want, yeah.
Other member comments? Member Adamic?
Yeah. So I like a lot of the proposed mitigation strategies, but I just can't believe how much extra work and money and complication all of this is. Like, it's very cobbled together, not cobbled together, but just what if you took the money that these consultants are going to be charging for counting the trips? What if you took the money from, preparation of the initial application? What if you, I don't know, the salary of the transportation manager, et cetera? What could we do with that money? And I don't agree that this should be the burden of the, new developers, because why are they to shoulder this when, they're like a new small fraction, yet all of us are using the roads, but we don't pay because we're, grandfathered in. It's our trips are okay, but the new trips are not, right? And they have to implement all of these things. And I wish, and I'm no expert here, but I wish that there was some policy that could just align incentives correctly, and you wouldn't need all of this. Like, what if there was like, and maybe this is all like not legal or whatever, but what if you had a fee per inhabitant that would fund improvements to alternative transportation, like transit or building out active transportation infrastructure? What if each developer, sure, and hopefully eventually all the existing inhabitants and all the existing structures, if they paid a tax per parking space, you would naturally get everyone implementing these things because it's in their interest. Like maybe they can turn their parking spaces into like whatever, like hang out on some chairs or whatever, as long as they could demonstrate that they're no longer using the parking space. Because without parking spaces, you don't have traffic. And so I realize there's like the problem of like spillover when one doesn't have, but I think if we uniformly actually paid someone, if we all paid for the parking, the cars don't appear out of nowhere. The cars appear because they have a place to park. So I realize parking is part of one of the mitigation things, but what if we just start from there? Like start taxing parking spaces, have a fee per individual because they're the ones who are traveling, and then solve this collectively at a city level. The city is like, why have everyone trying to solve this and generating all this paperwork and redoing things over and over again? They can do that all they want, but if we don't have the transit and the bike infrastructure and so on, I just don't know that this is going to get us to where we want to be. People are not paying the cost of the trips. And I mean, also at the individual level, like I'll just tell an anecdote because we have so much time and we're not running over at all. But yesterday I wanted to go to a talk on Stanford campus. Parking on Stanford campus is an awful thing. And so I looked, it would take me 24 minutes to drive, or it would take me 38 minutes to bike. And I biked because I didn't want to deal with Stanford parking. And that's the kind of thing that we need. It was automatic. No one had to reduce. I mean, maybe Stanford did, maybe that's part of their TDM to have like crappy parking. But I think everyone should have crappy parking, and then people will, adjust accordingly. And as long as we're making car driving as good as it is, and it's pretty good, I just don't. So sorry, this is just my way of saying, let's tax the parking. Let's not do this complicated stuff. And I'm sorry, I can't give more useful feedback within the framework that you're asking.
And Kuzma?
Yes, I guess I'll echo some of the Ergonomics, like general principled concerns about the new developments are not all the developments in the city. That's why I sort of was asking about costs. I think having DDM is great. I want to make sure that we have the cost somewhat quantified, so it's easy to say as both people who are being asked for input, as people who are being asked for input on policy, and as members of the public, here's how big the actual cost is for programs. Is it like, hey, we don't even need to worry about it level? Is it this is actually getting to a problem? And so that's why I was inquiring about that earlier. My questions about the baseline numbers for near transit were basically exactly the same concern that Member Stone was raising about, I don't want to accidentally create a situation where basically people are not being rewarded for doing their projects near transit or the such. I don't think, I just want to make sure the incentives are appropriately aligned there. I don't have a good enough understanding of how the ITE trip baseline or trip counter or estimator works to comment on that in particular. I just want to make sure that we don't run into bad incentives. And if it's the same thing applies in my mind to any developments that occur in the areas with no parking, to the questions I was asking about how things act in areas where the city, for whatever reason, does not have parking minimums. My impression of reading the report had been that if a development goes below the ITE nominal number for that type of development for parking, then they would get credit for that strategy, which I think is appropriate, because I think that is saying that if the development is not going to produce many trips, they should get credit for that. And so I want to make sure that I don't want us to be penalizing development because they happen to build in an area that does not have parking minimums. And so I don't, that is something that's, just want to make sure that we handle that correctly. So along the same lines, parking supply, it sounds like a lot of these strategies are going to have some flexibility for applicants. I do hope for some things like parking supply, there's yes, the report mentioned a nominal number of, like, if you hit a 30% under whatever the baseline amount of parking is, that corresponds to typically a 10% reduction in ADT. If a development decides they wanted to go all in on that and do a 60% reduction from the nominal number, it'd be good in my mind if they're able to get credit for it. It sounds to me like that is the case. But they would require sort of going outside of the normal checklist to do that. Does that match? Is that correct?
I think Julie could also speak to this, or Natalie. So I acknowledge that we don't want to create a perverse incentive where if they adopt parking supply below whatever the minimum is, that there are spillover effects. So we want to present the toolkit, especially for the parking strategies, and acknowledge that those strategies work well with ones that would support replacing car ownership. So, for example, really encouraging car share, transit subsidies, transit passes, and the like, so that you don't create a situation where there's overspill parking effects in the neighborhood.
Okay.
So.
Yes. Yeah, so I guess my reaction to that and what I was going to say next is basically, first off, I think both the city should also probably be looking at how we manage our street parking. That can obviously have, that's a separate project from the TDM ordinance, but I hope we're also doing that. But also a lot of the areas like that have no parking minimums are the ones that are near transit right now, are the ones where building there is an incentive for people to reduce car ownership. The last thing, let's see, that is all my comments. Yeah, so the last thing I was going to mention was on the structure of penalties. I think there was an allusion to potentially doing this in this staff presentation, or something like this, but I think it would be good to make sure the penalties scale a bit more by effectively the amount of extra trips you're failing to eliminate. I just saw, like, right now it's probably reasonable as you go from small to medium to large, but I don't have a good sense of how large is it. So if you had like an extra large project, the fees may become effectively so nominal relative to the size of the project that it's fine violating them. Now, add to the earlier point, a lot of times this goal of the city is to never even hit the penalties. And there's other tools the city has, like being aggressive about how much we're willing to issue permits to people who are not in compliance. But I think making sure those fines scale appropriately is good. I also think it might make sense to have the option of more egregious fines for projects that are egregiously out of compliance. I don't know if, again, that's something that hopefully never has to be used, but if it's on the books, that probably helps to incentivize it never being used. So that was the extent of my comments.
Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah,
sure. So I like the idea of, having like the standard for all of Mountain View, because I mean, from what I've seen, it seems to be like there is a certain TDM for certain sections of precise plans, or things like this. So I think it will simplify the process. Whether the process is good or not, that's another question to Commissioner Adamix, so I like that idea. I'm a bit, I don't know, skeptical of the reporting. I've done surveys, for my employers, things like this, and I don't think the data that you get out of it is very good. And it's what's relied, but if it's validated by people who act a little bit like CPAs in a way, that are certified professionals, I think that's pretty good enough, I suspect. But I personally would prefer to have something that's more driven by technology. So you know, if you do driveway counts, I mean, you know, cameras can do this 24/7, and it's a you know, that's much better data, I think, than any sort of self-reporting. And then if you can put back the slide of the strategies. That's the next one, I think. Yeah, I'm a bit skeptical of some like a backyard program. There is none really in Mountain View, so, and I don't think it's going to happen ever. So and I guess the only place would be maybe Google, who has like the bikes to share, but it doesn't seem like a practical, you know, item to pick in the menu. And then for the ride share. If it means, you know, using Uber or Lyft or one of these things, I don't think it's a very good solution to do this, because it's still a trip. So and people tend not to really share this. I mean, it's especially with Waymo, you have automated things, so that's pretty much a single occupancy, you know, trip and. So if it means, you know, the Uber or things like this, I think it goes against the idea of limiting the number of trips, and you know, it has its value. I mean, I think it's very, very doable for people who cannot no longer drive or don't want to own a car or things like this. So it's definitely something practical. But if the goal is to reduce the number of trips, it's not bad. So and these are my comments.
Thank you. So I'll add my comments. I kind of to substantially agree with Member Adamic. This kind of requires a more libertarian-based solution, and that we have externalities that we don't pay for, and this is kind of a Band-Aid of not paying for those externalities. What works is priced parking. Okay, that's all the literature says that's the most effective way to eliminate trips. I don't see that focused quite enough. And that eliminates trips from residences when street parking is charged for in all areas. And some cities have that. They get there with when they limit the parking supply. And limited parking supply is also a tax on employers when they realize employees have to go drive around and find additional parking in the free areas or park farther away, or it becomes truly paid parking. So I think it's a Band-Aid. I'd like to see some things a little more quantified and concrete in the details, having worked for employers under TDMs for the last 25 years. They move faster than the cities. They can hire more expensive consultants in the cities, and they find ways around caps, whether they're peak trip caps or other things that they generally are smart at figuring out what the loopholes are, and whether it's I had an employer, they would design buildings two ways, the one they showed the city. And then after they did enough hiring, they would order more desks and more chairs. The city has no control over that anymore. So yeah, the number of trips goes up. You get valet parking solutions to double park the cars, and they get around the counting mechanisms in various ways, whether so I think price parking is where we got to get to. Most employers aren't very effective in implementing these, and their bang for the buck is relatively low. But I'd like to see some of the more specific. The bike facilities, what's it mean? Fully designed bike parking. There's showers that are not implemented. You know, there's changing rooms of people who walk and bike with. So I think it's a Band-Aid. I'd like to see something spelled out more concretely, but it's really about a culture change in the long term. And, you know, all the psychological studies, employee buyout doesn't do, cash out doesn't do as good as charging people for parking. So I think we can find more lightweight ways where people naturally comply because of their own interest. That would be my endorsement. But I think we have to start someplace. And I'll second Lotta's thing about Stanford. It is the only effective TDM in the area. It's also the only one that charges for parking on all streets, whether residential or near buildings. And they have the highest non-single commute in the area. They're the only employer and the only city that has parking permit required every place.
Can we put up the slide with the two questions? I just want to make sure that there wasn't any. I think we provided comment on that.
Great, thank you.
Confirming there's no need for a motion.
If we want to, as a body, concur, then we could for the question number one. But I'm not sure if we are as a body concurring.
I think there are various recommendations hidden in people's comments that
Yeah,
yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Given that this is an ordinance, it may be helpful to get a motion on number one.
So it wouldn't, or?
It would.
Then I'll need to. Oh,
So going back to the prior slide of the
List.
yeah, are any of those contemplated in an ordinance, or is the ordinance just about the size of the development and the percentage reduction, as it were?
So, yeah,
Go ahead.
so the ordinance is focused on the outcome, which is the reduction in trips. And this is more like the output in terms of what they might do to achieve that reduction. So this is kind of a guide for when they're developing the TDM plan. But the requirement itself is to do with trips and estimated trips.
Sorry, I'm trying to think about how to summarize the feedback that we gave to know if any of that's important to call out in a motion. The things I heard were, I heard myself and Member Stone mention some concerns about how the baseline is calculated to ensure that we have good incentives near transit. Or for transit-oriented development effectively. There were some overall concerns about the structure of the TDM program. I don't know that those affect the motion, or like the specific strategies that would be considered.
Go back to.
I know I mentioned a couple things about the limited parking supply item, but those might be specific enough to not matter for that. Member Bondsman mentioned something about the rideshare item. I was looking at that. I'm not actually sure that refers to Uber and Lyft, so I'm not sure how that should be interpreted. And there's a general emphasis on paying attention to parking strategies. Oh, and I also mentioned something about the fee structures for penalties. I don't know what, if any of that would be useful to call out in a motion.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is BPAC would concur, the motion would be the BPAC concurs with staff recommendation on the framework while ensuring that the structure of the framework incentivizes transit-oriented development and encourages priced parking. Would that be a good enough summary?
I think we can all be unified on price parking be a good strategy. That's definitely something I feel like that we're all unified on. I think, well, I guess in our comments, we focused on recommendations and improvements, not necessarily talking about what we liked.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yes.
Yeah.
I love the efforts overall. I forgot to say that.
Yeah, I think the idea is basically that we are endorsing an ordinance and made comments that it perhaps could even be more aggressive in some areas, and with specific mention of price parking.
I don't even know if that's aggressiveness versus program design, but
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that there's generally some reluctance to fully endorse the design as presented, but we do like in general the idea of a TDM program. But I heard some comments that maybe we think that this is the wrong way, or some of us feel that this is the
Yeah,
wrong
I
way to
mean,
do
but
TDM.
I don't know to what extent that's helpful. I would, for example, prefer the VTA version where there's a way to offset by paying into transit. And I mean, there's like the immediate thing of like e-bike and so on, but I don't think that this is a per project problem, and I don't think that's the way to solve it. I think the way to solve it is to actually make city level policies that the city implements, infrastructure that the city implements, transit that, you know, the county or city implements. But that might not help with your motion because I'm unlikely to support it, but I think there's the VTA thing in the pipeline, and I don't know if we need like a Mountain View specific thing at all. I mean, it seems more complicated and maybe redundant, and I just don't know.
Yeah, I guess, given this is what's in front of us, we don't have those more encompassing policies that we can consider. And they may not ever come to a VBAC.
It's also something that came in front of BPAC earlier, right? So I'm personally a bit leery about tossing something that
I guess
we have a bind on. I mean, 'cause,
Yeah,
you know,
I
then it's
think
like
there's
we wasted
value
a year, so-
in doing
so-
TDM. I'm leery about. I don't think the city's just saying, we're gonna do this TDM framework and we're not gonna do anything else. I hope that's not what they're saying. So I guess thinking just about this and in the future, also thinking about other things that we wish the city would do. But this is a separate issue, so taking
But
this
it's
as a
not
silo.
separate. If this thing were to get money, that could fund city level solutions, but it's not proposing to
So
do that at all.
It is. There's programs in here that include funding the TMA. There's programs that are in here that include potentially providing funding to work with VTA to increase service in areas. Like
Yeah, I think
there's
current TDMs, for instance, some of them do or used to buy Caltrain passes for all employees, so they're funding transit. Some of them do create shuttle networks or work with the VTA to increase service in certain corridors. So they do pay for transit in some cases. How effective some of those are, you know, is questionable. But I think the issue I see is we have a TDM in front of us. I think it's a stepping stone, as it were, to strategies on housing and commercial development and strategies on particularly parking development and incentives. It has kind of a general framework with some menu of possible options. I guess I don't want to send a message that it's not something that BPAC believes can be helpful. I'd like to send a message that it should be kind of yes and, as it were.
How about something like the BPAC supports the staff TDM direction, TDM framework, and would like to see emphasis on known strategies like transit-oriented development and priced parking.
And EMT equitable mitigation or VTA's effort. Do you want to put a nod there?
just for clarity, that was referenced in the report as a,
Something you are exploring.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's, because that's not very clear to me how that would work yet, because that wouldn't really affect necessarily driveway counts or the other measures. So I like, I guess,
Yeah, it
it
has
seems,
like
it sounds like a good idea, but without seeing it fleshed out more, maybe I'm not wanting to call that out specifically in a motion. If I could make that motion that I just said.
I'm not really sold on specifying, you know, 2 out of the, you know, that list. I mean, you know,
Okay.
I'd rather have something where we want to make sure that the strategies are fully validated or things like this, because I don't see the rideshare program as something that helps at all.
Yeah, I think
instance.
rideshare, again, a lot of these aren't defined. Rideshare is often van share, I think. in this
Well,
context.
sorry,
there
can
is
someone-
car share too.
Can
so,
someone-
I mean, that's-
someone from staff clarify what rideshare program on that list means? I just want to make sure that we're even talking to the right thing.
Include, I mean,
What's the definition in the toolkit?
it's HOV mode shares, so, right, so with high occupancy vehicles includes van pool, carpool, ride share with 2 or more occupants.
Sometimes the ride share is like after hours or
Yeah,
emergency.
emergency ride home.
Oh, that's a different item.
It's still a trip. So-
Yeah, so I mean,
That's on the
it's
auxiliary
encouraging you to
strategies.
make 200,
Sorry, so rideshare is not like Uber and Lyft.
No.
It's basically a carpooling program.
Carpool or van pool.
Okay,
What I heard is that it's also Uber and Lyft, so.
With
So-
2 people in it.
Yeah, I mean, the-
2.
In addition to the driver.
Yeah, I guess I don't necessarily agree personally with these core and auxiliary strategies, but I'm not ready to
Pick 'em
pick
apart,
them.
yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that what you're doing is based on data, and I did see references for all the numbers that you're using.
Yeah.
So that's good. And I kind of hinted at what I think is a brand new updated reference that looks pretty good to me, so maybe look into that. But that was my comment. I don't want to put that into a motion. I don't want to nitpick this list in a motion, so maybe
Yeah.
we don't do that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's to my point, like, let's say we want these things to be validated and
Yeah.
where are the ones that really work.
I think there
Yeah.
are a couple concerns about, I think, creating a poor incentive structure. And I thought I want to make sure I captured, although I think that is tweaks to the existing framework, not fundamentally reshaping the framework or the such. So I just want to, or it's validating that the existing framework does indeed handle those fine.
Yeah.
Because I have a good enough understanding of the IT trip generation tool to comment on if it's actually even wrong right now. But I don't know how to capture that in a motion, if that's even worth
I
capturing.
guess maybe we can just do the very basic, we agree that we support staff continuing to develop this EMT framework,
TDM framework.
TDM.
Medium framework to reduce vehicle trips.
And as part of the city's larger
Yeah.
effort to reduce vehicle trips.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think is a necessary, if you want to add step.
Okay. I would like to make a motion saying that the BPAC supports staff TDM, developing this TDM plan as part of the city's effort to reduce VMT.
Second that, so.
Is that a helpful motion to staff? That's almost kind of too vague, I worry.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So the same questions we will be taking to EPC.
Yeah.
And I need to tell them what VPAC said
Yeah.
in response to this.
Yeah.
And I kind of liked how we were framing it. Maybe if we can do a hybrid. Like, initially when we started saying VPAC supports the staff recommendation of the framework that was presented and would like to see staff to continue developing the framework in an effort to reduce the vehicle trips.
Yeah, I like the idea because it's not our authority to talk about zoning and density, but it is EPC's. to some extent. So I think the idea of we endorse the framework and as you originally talked about, emphasizing the impact on types of development and parking. Passes it kind of the EPC for their work.
Yeah, and maybe if I can give you a glimpse of how we'll be presenting it to EPC is that, you reviewed, you considered, discussed, supported the staff recommendation on the framework and directed staff to continue developing this framework to meet the city's goal for reducing vehicles. BPAC also discussed some of the specific things such as, the price parking or incentivizing TOD developments. That kind of captures, some of the key things that we heard from multiple members as going into further detail of that. If that is something that you would like to consider.
Let me try to, I don't know where I am in terms of being in order of this, but can I try to make a replacement motion that the BPAC supports the staff recommended framework and would like to see staff continue to develop the framework to avoid unintended incentives against projects that may support lower VMT? Does
Yeah,
that capture the
Yes, I think so.
discussion?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you say it again?
BPAC supports the staff recommended framework and would like to see staff continue to develop the framework to avoid unintended incentives against projects that may support lower VMT.
Okay, great.
I don't know where that is in terms of like the rules of order, but someone definitely needs to second it.
I'm comfortable with seconding that.
Okay, and since you made the original motion, I'm happy with the
Yes,
being in order on that.
So we have a motion, we have a second.
yes.
Are we ready to call for a vote? Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? 1-1.
Okay.
Is there anything else we need to be concrete about?
That was great.
Another question.
The other one was additional input, which I think that the rest of the conversation.
The whole conversation provided enough additional input.
Okay, so wrapped up on item 6.3 TDM, moving on to item 6.4 Vision Zero.
Thank you, Ben.
I believe we have staff report. Thank you, Lynn.
A lot going on my little screen. Bear with
Yep.
me for a second.
Timing yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Now it looks normal, almost. Okay. Good evening, I'm Karen Gauss, Transportation Planner with City of Mountain View. I have an update for you tonight on the Vision Zero marketing and communication. What do we call it? Marketing and community outreach project, which was the fun teal Drive Wisely signs I'm sure you saw all over the city last fall. The goal of that project was to increase awareness of Vision Zero and which is to reduce traffic deaths. The Vision Zero Action Plan was adopted by City Council in September of last year, and it outlines the 7 E's in this hexagon graphic you may have seen on our Vision Zero website and in the plans. The E's like engineering, education, enforcement, encouragement, etc. And this framework will help us reach our goal of zero traffic deaths by 2030. And a highlight of the 7 E's is the distinction between infrastructure and non-infrastructure recommendations. And one non-infrastructure recommendation is to do a marketing and outreach campaign for traffic safety. And this Drive Wisely Project 2099 is such a campaign. So in the Vision Zero Action Plan, Local Road Safety Plan, we have emphasis areas for increasing traffic safety. And our campaign's objective was to hit on one or more of these emphasis areas. We issued an RFP for this project and a panel chose MIG as the consultant. MIG have done Vision Zero and traffic safety campaigns in several other cities. MIG's work is Speeding Kills, Safety is Your Turn, and the Smell the Roses campaign for Pasadena and several others. We held a kickoff meeting, which included folks from our police department and our communications team. We looked at campaigns that MIG didn't do, but from other agencies across the country. And in our sort of visioning and brainstorming sessions, we identified the tone and the level of shock value we wanted, the slogans and images to have. The Slow the Flock Down birds from Seattle at the bottom here in blue stuck with us and stood out to our group. And we assumed that the birds are a thing in Seattle and it's part of the city's wildlife and their city's identity, somewhat like a mascot. So the idea of a mascot popped out. Staff happened to also visit Phil Higgins, our wildlife biologist at Shoreline, who keeps track of our native burrowing owls at Shoreline. We like the idea of a natural mascot from here, similar to the UC Santa Cruz banana slug or the Stanford tree. Owls are known for their eyes. They can see very well, which is great for traffic safety. We remembered, some of us kids from the 80s, the Give a Hoot, Don't Pollute campaign with an owl. And that was very catchy and successful. So the owl idea was very popular amongst staff and rose to the top amongst other ideas. So we had 3 different, totally different style, tone, slogan campaigns developed by MIG, and we took them out to places with a lot of Mountain View residents, like well-attended events. We did intercept surveys, which is like a man on the street interrupting folks and having them flip through the book of different ideas at the La Plaza Market and at the concert on the Plaza and a movie night in July. And overwhelmingly, folks liked the owl campaign over the others. So campaign outreach, we started in August of last year and we ran for the fall season. And the campaign concluded at the end of the year. We produced dozens of unique collateral, including bus shelters along El Camino. We did a light rail station domination where the light rail platform was covered head to toe in these posters. We did flags on every light pole on El Camino Real between Grant Road and the Palo Alto Medical Foundation. So folks zooming around the cloverleaf of 85 and El Camino would have seen these. We did over 200 yard signs, an activity book here at the top. We did palm cards, temporary tattoos, and reflective stickers. We went to every back to school night and we were ready with all of these materials. So we had good timing.
In multiple languages.
Multiple languages, so we did over 11,000 utility bills go out in envelopes from the city, and we included this goldenrod translated flyer inside the utility bill, which is always just white paper. They had never seen us do a colored piece of paper in that utility bill. And this is translated into Spanish, Chinese, and Russian. We did 8-foot-long vinyl banners at schools. At the bottom here is the parking lot at Mountain View High. Upper right is at Cuesta and Miramonte, and there were others. And we did the back windows of the Mountain View Community Shuttle. We also did digital ads in multiple languages. And they looked like this, which I thought was quite clever. And we worked with 3 community-based organizations to train a community leader to give a presentation about Vision Zero, to see how the campaign was received, and to teach traffic safety. MIG also created a pedestrian safety game, and we interacted with over 200 participants at Monster Bash and the tree lighting event. So lessons learned. The digital ads were seen by 11 million people, or 11 million times, and they were effective at reaching people in their native language, Spanish, Russian, and Chinese. There's a whole packet about the digital campaign in the agenda if you want to deep dive. And our ads had higher than industry average for their click rate. And that the digital aspect is measurable, and the rest of the campaign, we really didn't have a way to measure it. So one thing I did was to go out to the Mountain View Farmers Market a few Sundays ago and speak to folks and ask them if they lived and worked in Mountain View, and if they said yes, then I had this sign kind of dorky around my neck. Folks saw it and they smiled, and it made them want to talk to me, I think. Did this sign look familiar? Did you see the campaign? And I had a flip book of all of the different materials. Did you see the stickers, the utility bill, the bus shelters, etc.? And I had a grid and kept track of which items they had seen, and asked them if they felt the campaign was effective at creating behavior change for safer driving, walking, biking behavior. And the materials that folks saw more than others were by far the yard signs, and then the bus shelters, and then the community shuttle. And I wouldn't have known that if we didn't go out and ask people, like, what did you see? So 70% of respondents said that the campaign was effective at making behavior change. And then here's a chart of which materials they saw. UBI is the utility bill insert. And so at the CBO partner presentations, MIG had a survey at the end, and the participants told us that what they learned, that our materials were bringing about behavior change, and that our traffic safety information gave them new information that they previously didn't know. So that's another way we were able to measure if the campaign was effective or not. And the project was delivered on time and on budget, and we have the contingency still sitting there. So we plan to do more campaign materials around safe parking. So you'll see that coming soon, spring, summer. And then if we were to get additional funding allocated, we could run a second campaign. And we'd like to hear from you tonight, which topic area should we consider or is top of mind for you for a second fresh campaign? And that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you. Clarifying questions from DPEC members.
What is the message on parking? I don't know.
We're not revealing it. It hasn't been, we have no meat on the bone yet. We've
Oh.
just extended the amount of funding that we're able to spend. We're like getting ready to spend the contingency. And that's paperwork and signing things with the consultant, and we've already talked about what extra materials and what we could do with the contingency, and overwhelmingly amongst them and staff, and looking at upcoming projects that are going to be on the ground, the bike lane on El Camino, the California Street project, and another project we have in mind on Middlefield. And just in general around the city, that blocked bike lanes are an issue, and it's a traffic safety situation. We are all kind of in consensus to do some materials, like we need materials. We want to go out and inform folks and do door hangers, and we'd like to provide the police department with something. So like I currently have like, here's the utility bill insert and like the palm card. I could stick this on someone's car if they're parked in the bike lane, or maybe an Amazon vehicle if the city so wished that staff spend their time to do that. But I don't really have material that says like, please don't block the bike lane. And we may need to do that when the flexi posts get installed on El Camino in the next few months, or when the California pilot project gets going. We have materials to send out for where to place your trash can when the parking shifts over and you can't put your trash can at the curb anymore. It has to come out 6 feet. I don't have materials for like, you need to park over here, don't block the bike lane. So that's what staff and MIG are putting together, and that's what we have now for the contingency. My question
the
for you
next
tonight
campaign,
is the
let's-
next campaign.
Member Demick?
I was just wondering, like, what would a campaign for high injury network locations be? Like, I can't picture what that is.
It might be actually similar to a speeding campaign. Yeah,
So
So the
We had a
current one
mul-
was kind of a speeding campaign, yes, okay.
we had a multi-month process of figuring out, should we say, slow down, no speeding? Should it be focused on DUI or these other topics? So it's a difficult thing to figure out. And if you have a topic that's top of mind, that the next year, if you were to see a yard sign at every school, a flag on every pole along El Camino, and a banner at every fire station, what should it be about? Speeding? One of these priorities is a good place to start.
Good.
Additional clarifying question?
What was the budget and what was the contingency that was left over?
The contingency left over is $25,000, and the total budget was 140.
usually we have a 10% contingency. We can check.
So it might have
the
been a
data.
total of 140, something like that.
Yeah, we can
The,
check.
the rough
It
number
was
is what I was curious
200K,
about.
yeah.
I won't quote you on the exact number then,
Yeah.
but I mostly want to know the rough number. That's all.
Okay, Michelle? I guess I have one question. I understand the existing campaign, the prior campaign focused on materials and media impressions, either on social media or buses or whatever. In various proposals from the consultants, did they ever talk about other vehicles or types of campaigns other than media that might complement or provide follow-through on the first wave of media?
Not sure I understand your question. We did look at other campaigns that cities are doing. You may be familiar with the Slow Down San Jose campaign, and VTA
Yeah, I guess
piggybacked on that.
I guess what I'm thinking is more like in commercial, sometimes they'll do messaging, advertising or whatever. And then they may follow up with events or engagement activities for potential customers, whatever, anything from trade shows to, community events, or they may follow up in sampling or other non kind of media as the second step. And so my question is, have we seen any examples of that? And my comment will follow on about what might be.
So the campaign did include events in that we went out to each of the schools when they had their ice cream socials and their back to school nights. And we brought these materials with us. So it was
Some engagement.
yes, engaging people.
And we do bike rodeos and traffic safety courses at every school. That's bike safety,
Separate from this campaign.
separate from the campaign, and that's part of the larger effort of
Safe routes to
making it
school.
safer to travel around the city. That's safe routes to school. And so we have the opportunity to do a campaign again. We could potentially add to the list of materials that we would produce. A TV commercial is certainly an option. It's quite expensive. We had a list here of things we were able to do that fit within the budget of the project and that exist in Mountain View. We don't have billboards in Mountain View, so a billboard is not on the list.
Understand.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that answers my question good enough at this point.
Yeah.
Should we move on to public comments? Yeah, online members of the public?
Let's back up. Yes, we do. We have a few hands raised. There we go. Let's go to Mary first. And unmute yourself. And begin speaking when you're ready.
Good evening, thank you. And I have to say, I noticed these signs quite a bit myself, and I do feel like they're have affected my own driving and make me consider how important the Vision Zero is. I would I guess think it might be a good idea to go back and look at the timing of the campaign and compare that to maybe our collision data and kind of check to see, if that hasn't been done already, check to see if there's a correlation. Thank you.
Thank you. Valerie, you're up next. You can mute yourself
Hi
and
there,
Hi.
Valerie Fennick, former member of the BPAC and a current resident of Mountain View for over 20 years. I've seen these signs, loved them. As far as I know, you're not necessarily asking the public for suggestions for how you could spend your contingency plan, but I love the idea of pocket cards that can be shared with residents that can be put under windshield wipers. For example, to tell people like, hey, don't park in the bike lane. I live in Rex Manor, and about 14, 15 years ago, the city was redoing our sewers and sidewalks. The city was going to put in square curbs. The residents wanted to keep the round curbs. But one problem we do have, it's not severe. It's usually when visitors or new people move in, they park on the sidewalks with the rolled curbs. And the city had at the time said they were going to send out mailing and give us little things, materials we could share with visitors that showed them the proper way to park. And it didn't happen, which is okay. Because like I said, it's not a major issue, but just the thought of having a little card we can hand out about like, hey, this is a bike lane, or hey, this is a sidewalk. That's very non-confrontational and could get the message out. I love that. And maybe you could share those cards like at farmers market and things. I love that idea. The signage has been great. I think there was a sign there, but there's like the Kiwanis Welcome to Mountain View sign on Shoreline Boulevard. Would be a great place as well for some signage. And I really appreciate this. It's been very visible, and I love the owl. So great choice. Thank you.
Thanks.
Is that the last?
That's it for public comment.
Okay, public comments in the room? Seeing none, okay, we'll move on to committee comments. James?
Yeah, I like the report. I think I like things that are correspond sort of an actionable thing, and I do actually quite like the focus on parking for the use of that contingency. Valerie Finwick's comments about sidewalk parking make me also think like make sure to include sidewalk parking in that. And in terms of actionable stuff, I think going forwards, it may make sense to coordinate with the police department about if we're going to do anything. So try to coordinate it with it. Okay, I don't know exactly what the city we're going to choose to like do as a campaign, but if we're doing a campaign about speeding, try to get the police department to like a week after the campaign starts rolling out, do some targeted enforcement of speeding or something to just sort of help emphasize that message and to make it so that fewer people are speeding in the city. I think that's why also tying any campaigns to new infrastructure is good, because there's new infrastructure that changes how people should behave. Messaging about that is valuable. As opposed to the exact particular things. One thing that any changing laws would be good, like the new daylighting law. I think this would actually be this might be a good opportunity to both do some messaging about that and start more aggressive enforcement of it. And if there's any other laws that change, that might make sense. As opposed, and as for should we focus on speeding versus safe routes to school specifically versus areas along the high entry network, I have trouble judging or gauging that. That's actually where I would probably go and look at those dashboards our police department put together to start getting a feel for things. And that's actually also where I might be curious to look at the near miss data, to be quite honest, since that might help me get a sense of what other things are going on in the city that might make sense to try to message about. So yeah, that's all I had.
Thank you. Other committee comments?
I was thinking about education. I also wonder if there's, I think there is value also in educating the public on infrastructure, like what it is that they may not necessarily know about, right? Maybe a lot of people living here never saw a protected intersection, right? Which we might be getting some relatively soon, or they don't know what a lead pedestrian interval is or how that makes things safer. So like taking the things that the city is doing that are making things safer and doing a little education so that there's more advocate, like the public is maybe more in support of it, or at least understands what's going on. I could see some value in that as a potential education.
More no right turns on red.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dominic?
Yeah, I want to say this is like the best executed, cutest campaign I've ever seen. So kudos on like a really well done thing. I did have, this is like a little bit of a tangent, but if I could show the slides, because they're Vision Zero related.
Let me see.
I guess I'll also say like, even though it's the best campaign, I'm a little bit skeptical about the effect of, we don't actually measure the effect. I'm a little bit skeptical that even looking at a short period of data, we could tell. And there's actually this study where they were using signs on the freeway saying like, drive carefully or something like that. And then actually the next quarter, half mile, there were more accidents. because I don't know, people were maybe thinking about driving carefully and they couldn't actually do it, or it made them less able to. So I think yeah, sorry, I said, I think it's like a very well done campaign. I have some reservations about how much of an actual difference it will make. I just don't know. And so as far as like making a difference and getting to Vision Zero in 1 year, I have a friend who moved from San Francisco to Bologna, Italy, and Bologna implemented a 30 kilometer an hour speed limit in much of its center. And then this is like 20 miles an hour. It's kind of radical. But they measured the effect a year later. Could we go to the next slide? So for the first time since 1991, which is when they started keeping track, they actually had 0 pedestrian fatalities. And collisions with pedestrians were down 16%. Total traffic fatalities, there were 10 of them, which was down 50% from the average from the 2 prior years. Severe injury collisions were down 39%. In contrast, so lest you think this is just like Italy all of a sudden had a decrease, like the US is actually having a decrease. Italy did not. It actually increased overall 9%. So this was kind of bucking the trend. As an aside, the metro rail trips increased substantially. The traffic-related pollution like dropped a lot. Bicycle trips were up 10%. So I just wanted to bring this up as like something that I think there's evidence that this really works. I'm not saying that it's like a politically popular decision. In fact, at the national level in Italy, people are kind of scrambling to see like how they cannot be Bologna, but actually people living in Bologna seem to appreciate the difference that this made. So it's not like an ad campaign, but, and then just, you know, in between when we got the agenda and now I saw this on this meme on Facebook. And so, yes, we need road safety and one can do campaigns and hand out helmets. But I think we also need to confront the possibility that we could take, you know, kind of not strong, but daring action and work more on reducing vehicle speeds in order to reduce and hopefully eventually eliminate traffic fatalities.
So I'll actually piggyback on a couple of fronts. So I visited Bologna and I actually got exposed to their campaign because I do walk and bike in Italy, and I couldn't read all the Italian, but I knew something was happening. So nice to see the result. So I would endorse the idea the owl should be maintained. The campaign and getting a message out and awareness was effective. I think the next part is action. Now, maybe not going to 18.6 miles an hour on every street is feasible for us, but I do like, rather than just pure awareness messages, I'd like to see components about action, whether it's hand out cards about parking on sidewalks or parking in bike lanes that those who are out biking and walking can use to become kind of advocates and spokesperson. We saw how word of mouth is important. Whether it's just, again, empowering advocates, how to talk to the press so they don't call it accidents. It actually looks like accidents are preventable. We got that message out. Well, one thing, you shouldn't call them an accident. You should call them a collision, because then people start to register. It's actually something preventable, not, some uncontrolled act of God accident. So I'd like to see not a messaging. I think we get diminishing returns by continuing the message, at least as a close follow-on. But perhaps educational cards, action-oriented cards to educate people about daylighting, and they can leave them on the cars parked on corners, blocking visibility of pedestrians in the bike lanes. And just, it doesn't sound like there was discussion about next phase actionable, but have there been campaigns that prompted actually more action from creating advocates, creating more educated population, willing to share and talk about it. So that's kind of, I think, the next phase that I think should be pursued. Mostly because I think just doing pure messaging, you get diminishing returns. And I will say, I hope the yard signs included the ones on the road medians. Those were the major. So it wasn't just actually front yards, but it was actually public right-of-way placements that I noticed the most.
Yeah, if I may. Okay, so I wanted to provide my comments. So I like the campaign. I mean, you know, it was a a wise choice to pick the hour. So, obviously, in terms of the next focus, I agree parking could be a good thing. So I'd like to make a plug for the daylighting because this is something new. So it's something that people will have to get used to. We are not marking the daylights thing, so that's really an indication for people to gauge and things like this. So maybe there are some creative things that can be done with this is how far you have to be from the crosswalk or something like this. And to piggyback on the comment from Commissioner Kuzma, I think it would be nice to have it tied with some enforcement. So if you target, for a week or a month, the bike lanes, have some enforcement there. Same thing for the daylighting, and same thing for the sidewalk, kind of parking or encroaching or things like this. Related to parking or things, of that nature, there is quite a bit of encroachment on crosswalks. When people don't stop there, also on bike boxes, I often bike by Covington, in front of Black going to Grant. There is a bike box there. I always have to wind up on the road to be in front of the cars because people just ignore it completely. And so it's not parking per se, but it's about keeping the cars where they belong, not on the crosswalk, on the sidewalks and so on. And one quick comment on the safe routes to schools, in terms of locations. Always remember that for many kids in Mountain View, the route to school goes to Los Altos. So anything that can be done about, this kind of crossings, like, like at Monte, for instance, is a barrier there. Don't forget them. So.
Okay. No further comments? I think you were looking for feedback and comments. No motion required. Sounds like we're ready to close this one.
Yep.
Thank you. So without wrapping up on item 6.4 and moving on to item 6.5, the work plan.
Okay. So here's our work plan. So just a few updates. Okay. From last time. Okay, no, the search doesn't seem to be working.
My mouse.
It was just lagging for a bit.
Yeah, it's
It's a bit laggy.
yeah. Let me see. I'm not sure what's going on.
It's spinning on your machine.
Okay, let me just work off the hard copy then. So not too many edits to the work plan. Let's see. The new items were, there was a bike ride on December 14th for the holiday ride. And then today we're looking at the Vision Zero, one of the implementation items from the Vision Zero action plan, local road safety plan, and also the PDM ordinance. In terms of the tentative agenda list, let's see if this is working yet. No, I don't know why it's not working. I'll just close it. So in terms of the tentative agenda list, we had a couple of new items. So I wanted to point out that we have a special meeting on March 11th to consider the active transportation plan. And we also have a special meeting on April 2nd. And we have cancelled the meeting on March 26th, and we'll pull those items into the April 2nd. We had to kind of schedule around some specific dates that were happening in terms of council and things going to other events. So yeah, so the March meeting is going to get moved into April 2nd, and then we have an extra meeting on March 11th. I think that's it for the work plan.
Any clarifying questions? Any public comments?
No hands on Zoom. We have a gentleman here.
Public comment in the room.
Hi. My name is Max Bozell. I'm a Mountain View resident. Thank you for your service to our community and to staff for what's likely an extraordinary long day today. I have some prepared comments that I'd like to share related to your work plan and call to your attention items on your tentative agenda list and how those items relate to pedestrian and bike safety for Act 3 rail corridor crossing, specifically the Mountain View Caltrain station and its high volume with significant pedestrian and bicycle interaction. These items include the Moffett Boulevard Precise Plan and its connectivity to the rail corridor, the Council's Strategic Work Plan, the Vision Zero Action Plan, and the Castro Grade Separation Interim Project Improvement Project. As you may know, the Castro Grade Separation and Access Project proposed to the City Council in January of 24 no longer incorporates grade separations for bikes and peds at the Caltrain station, leaving 2 at-grade crossings. In addition, the grade separation project is likely to be significantly delayed due to high costs, and the existing crossing at Castro Street only provides gate protection on one side of the tracks. Besides, vehicles make their approach and not necessarily bicycles traveling on the opposite side of the road, even though that may be illegal. Fortunately, there is a solution. The National League of Cities article identified Vision Zero and the danger at grade crossings as an opportunity for communities to enhance safety measures at their rail corridor crossings, to include the implementation of quiet zones, which installs supplementary safety measures that reduce the collision risk potential below the national significant risk threshold. This approach can only be initiated by the city, such as the quiet zone projects that are underway in the cities of Menlo Park, Palo Alto, and San Mateo, and similar projects that have been implemented in other cities in the Bay Area. The city's own master plan policies, which are congruent with Vision Zero's approach for enhanced safety at rail corridors, include 1.3.3, support updates to existing infrastructure to reduce conflicts between modes and improve accommodations for pedestrians. 3.3.1, which is develop a priority list for enhanced pedestrian crossings along key barriers such as railroad tracks. Please consider the National League of Cities highlighted Vision Zero strategy for quiet zones to be included in the priority to enhance safety measures at the Castro Grade crossing as part of the city's Vision Zero approach and other related projects. Thank you.
Any other members of the public wishing to speak? Seeing no further comments from the public, we can move to committee comments. Okay.
I don't have any.
I had a, okay, I don't know.
Oh, you want to look at the towel? Could we pull up the tentative agenda list? Just
Let me see. It's still frozen. I'm not sure. Maybe I need to close that.
well,
Okay. No
I'm just
worries.
showing member Dominic the towel, not separate communications.
Not the
Okay.
what, sorry? Oh, okay.
So could I just then ask, is
Paper
the,
copies.
is the March 26th, like Castro Street intersections, does that include the rail crossing?
Oh, so let's see, so March 26th, there were some things that fell off and they're coming later. So I think that the 26th Council Strategic Work Plan, that one we were able to move to April 2nd. And the Castro Street intersections, I don't think they're ready. So that one will come later.
Okay.
Yeah. But that does not include the Great Separation. That's
Is that like between 100 and 200? And
that's like
200?
Evelyn Castro, Dana and Castro, California Castro.
So is it
Did I miss one?
Would it be in
Go on.
scope for the Moffett Boulevard precise plan?
Moffett Boulevard precise plan is on the other side of the of the Great Separation of the tracks, and actually. The Moffett Boulevard precise plan is also delayed, but we will be considering next month the Moffett Boulevard Complete Streets project, which is to the north of Middlefield.
Well, so the thing that is relevant to the thing that the public brought up was there's items to be scheduled, the Castro Grade Separation Interim Improvement Project. Do we have some sense of when that might come before BPAC? So, or is that, does to be scheduled mean it's way far out right now?
I'm going to defer to Assistant Public Works Director Ed Rango.
Good evening. Thank you for the question. Ed Arango, Assistant Public Works Director. We are currently coordinating with Caltrain. As a reminder, both the Caltrain Transit Center Great Separation Project and the Ring Circle Great Separation Project. Those are led by Caltrain. Any type of project on the Caltrain tracks, Caltrain requires them to be the lead agency. We're the sponsor agency for that. So for the Castro Grade Separation Project or the Transit Grade Separation Project, we have interim improvements plan that were approved by council to do some interim improvements along Evelyn to help promote removal of the all vehicle crossings there, and then put some improvements in to facilitate the bike and ped movements.
Okay.
Caltrain, I think we just are wrapping up the consultant agreement for those improvements. Again, Caltrain is a lead agency on this. They hire a consultant, and they are wrapping up that agreement. It's being finalized, and once it is, they will initiate the design of the interim improvements at the Mountain View Transit Station.
Thank you.
That's right. So
design
when do you
hasn't-
think we might be hearing about this? Is this a 6 months from now, 18 months from now? I mean, I didn't know the date's not going to be known yet, but.
So we're hopeful that once we do the kickoff, which we expect to happen in the next couple of months, kickoff meeting, and then they'll initiate design, develop some concepts. So it may be 6 to 9 months from now before we're ready to come to BPAC with some information on what the interim groups do. Okay.
So the inputs for those concepts, who are those coming from?
As we do many of our infrastructure projects, kind of new complete streets and these great separation projects, we expect that there's a concept design element to it. And but it's first developed by staff and the consultant, and then it's brought to the BPAC for evaluation of the concept.
So there's no public input process on that concept development. I guess there was some general of the full grade separation, I thought, but not for the interim.
Depending on the scale and scope of the projects, we hadn't thought through what the public engagement piece is going to be with the interim improvements for Castro. So it could be a public meeting and then a BPAC meeting and then the CTC meeting and then a council meeting. Or it could be, we might pull back and identify that at the BPAC meeting, we want that to be the public meeting. And then we may or may not go to CTC and then council. We haven't developed the full public engagement. That's part of the process of initiating the kickoff to design and identifying what the community outreach is going to look like.
Okay, yeah, because I think a lot of people assumed, from the past, the grade separation is going forward. And yes, there's kind of a mess with shuttles and pedestrians and increasing railroad and some of the development happening or likely to happen in the future. But now that that kind of future state is pushed out into the mist, as it were, I think. Understanding the problems with the current state gets a little more important.
Yeah, and if I just give some context, again, the interim improvements are pretty straightforward. Once we get into the concept layouts, it's effectively removing the vehicle movement across the tracks, which currently it's leaving the downtown, heading north across the tracks and towards Central Expressway. The only vehicle movement that's allowed today is that vehicle movement, you can go straight and continue onto Moffett Boulevard, or you can make a right turn and go that eastbound, southbound on Central Expressway.
Yeah.
That's the only vehicle movement, so that would be eliminated. And then we put improvements in place to identify how best to accommodate the peds and the bikes crossing. So there'd be some interim improvements. This is inclusive of some significant signal improvements that are needed. Because currently that signalized intersection works as one intersection. So there's a preemption element. I'm sure you guys are aware is when a train starts to arrive, the Caltrain system preempts that signal to go yellow, go red, shut it in all directions. And it causes sort of a gridlock at that point. Less so now with the vehicle movements all, except for the northbound, again, movement and the right turning movement that was onto Central. And then we are looking at allowing east-west movement on Evelyn. So currently, if you're at the transit center, you're going on Evelyn and you're going west towards Castle Street, then you have to turn right, and now you're heading north and across the movement, across the tracks. You cannot turn left onto Evelyn, there's a median there. That's what we're looking to identify as an interim improvement to remove the median, allow those movements onto Evelyn such that people can get onto, make a left either at, I might be getting it wrong, Franklin, Bryant, maybe both, and then right onto Villa, to get to Shoreline, because that's the movement we're trying to bring back.
Yep. Thank you. Any other comments on the list? Okay. No further inputs required from commissioners on.
Oh, that's great.
Now, and then we could look in the work plan.
That would be great in case, I don't know, this is just it.
Y'all are moving away from the work plan.
Yeah, that. ETA.
Okay, we don't have.
Let's see if I can get this one to work.
Okay, are we ready to move on to item 6.8 then? Okay, so VTA report.
Yes, so there was a very nice overview update to the county, bicycle superhighway implementation plan. What makes this great is that it starts out saying what the vision is. You want all of these bikeways that people can get all around the county using. And then there's an overall map, I think. Yes, so you can actually see, and it's labeled, it's kind of hard to see, but you should check it out. What's been implemented, what's kind of underways, and what's being planned. And then subsequently, and we don't have to look at this, for each segment, it actually tells you how it's being implemented, what the progress is, what potential issues are, etc. So it's like a very nice overview of what's going on and what the bright future might be. And then beyond that, there was an update to the strategic plan, which is just starting. So it's more like thinking about how to get input on the strategic plan. So probably that's going to be more interesting later. And then there was all this visioning for the Stevens Creek Boulevard corridor, which is goes quite a ways from, I guess, Cupertino through Santa Clara to San Jose. And some things were shorter term, hopefully shorter term, like faster bus service. And then there were longer term things, and hopefully the separated bike facilities are, some of it is already being worked on and some of it will come online in the medium term, hopefully. So you can check that out too. And that's it.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions, clarifying questions from staff? I mean, from members? I'm sorry. No. Any public comments?
All quiet on Zoom.
Okay, any other committee comments?
Thank you as always for the report.
Okay, so next item we have for staff and committee comments.
Oh, that's Megan. Hang on. Okay, here I am. Just a few things on the list for today. Staff report. Okay, so as I mentioned, there was a holiday ride. We had a holiday closure. We also had a TDM community workshop on the 21st of January, which was also mentioned previously. El Camino Real project is moving forward. The pavement has been completed. The striping is underway. The travel lanes for motor vehicles have been completed, and they're still working on the bike lanes, the bikeways, and some of the stop bars, and also new crossings are still to come, the pedestrian hybrid beacons. That will be one of the last things. So I think we're on track to complete in June of 2025. That's the latest that I've heard. Community shuttle, there were some interruptions in January. Our vehicles are aging. We had ordered new EVs, and the company we initially ordered them from it became insolvent. And so then we had to order them from a different company. And of course, this was like quite a delay. They had a 12 to 14 month shipping time. So we're expecting them in mid-February for the first one, and then the other ones in March. And there will be some sort of celebration. I think it will be, what was the date for that? There'll be, I think it's the 26th of March. We're going to have a celebration of the new EVs for the community shuttle. And the active transportation plan, there will be a community meeting on March 5th to discuss the holistic network concepts.
I had a question on this. I mean, I just went through the Brown Act thing. So is it a meeting we can participate or attend and participate?
Yeah, subject to the Brown Act restrictions. So you shouldn't talk to each other at the meeting, that sort of thing.
Okay,
whatever the attorneys told you to do.
But there's no problem with the five of us showing up there.
Location for the March 5th meeting?
I think it will be here, but we'll send out an email. And then finally, we have a new Assistant Public Works Director who's starting on Monday. Alison Boyer, she's coming from Sunnyvale.
Just steal her Public Works Director from
Yes,
Sunnyvale.
yes, we're on a roll.
They are superior. Going back to one question on El Camino.
Yes.
Enforcement of no parking. When would that begin?
Has
It has
already
begun.
begun, depending on how you look at it. Caltrans put up A-frames and signs for no parking, and they've recently moved them further out away from the curb. The city, basically me and one other person, did a sweep and put flyers in every car we saw parked along El Camino. I can get a copy of that flyer to you if you want to see it.
That'd be good.
Red letters, no parking, bike lane coming soon. With project information and the QR code and links to the El Camino paving project page.
No tickets? Or...
So far, no tickets. I haven't heard if they want to do warnings or if tickets are coming in the future. I have no information.
So it's pretty easy. I mean, you just drive. And,
Yeah, especially the overnight ones.
Like...
So do we have any clue about whether Los Altos will be enforcing? Because they have many of some of the miles are
On their side of the street.
Yeah,
I
well, no, in the Mountain View side, I guess they have jurisdiction for parts of it, or it was kind of
Like near San Antonio.
Oh, interesting. We can check on that. I know that the land use is on our side. Yeah, so we'll check on how
Okay.
far up we can enforce. We within our jurisdiction is up to Rengsdorf. And we'll check what they're doing on there.
I pass 5 or 6 every day.
Oh, on the Los Altos end.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And one thing I noticed is that these A-frames that are in pretty much in the driving lane or what's gonna be the bike lanes, they are there in the morning, in the afternoon, evening, they are right on the sidewalk. So somebody moves them and they obstruct the sidewalk too. Which is
It might be
not
some of the
nice.
cyclists moving them to get through.
Was it all for the staff comments?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we're on to timing of our next meeting.
Wait,
We're on.
clarifying
we're-
question.
no, we're
Oh,
on-
sorry, clarifying questions. Right.
I was just wondering about the Ask Mountain View stats or when we might get an update.
We were planning an update today, but we didn't get to it yet. We've been quite occupied with ATP and TDM, so that's pushed other things out the way.
This isn't really a clarifying question, but is there any chance that when you do them, you could include going through the near miss?
Mm.
I've grown a bit concerned that those are actually getting looked at, and I've been reporting what I think are like bike ped issues into near miss, and I'm afraid it's going nowhere and maybe some other people's. Would that be, I mean, I don't know.
Are you able to see those?
I can see those.
Okay.
Brandon and I are in Ask MV the most to look at those things that get submitted and to respond to them or assign them to the right person if it's not in our purview. We do keep a record of all of the near miss reports. So the impression you got tonight that they're going nowhere, I think is just a separation between transportation planning here in City Hall and what the police department has time for or what they are looking at. But I see them and they're recorded and it's part of the transportation planning information that we
Thank
take in.
goodness.
My response that Valerie gets with my name or Brandon's name on it, that your near miss collision report is considered on par with a real collision for transportation planning purposes. I feel that that's correct and true. That the police department is, they have their own prerogative of the data that they are using or what they choose to look at. So there maybe some more coordination would be a nice thing we could
We
put
have
on our
some
to-do
scheduled.
list.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But, oh, I have those, yeah, the EMS data, we have a whole lovely spreadsheet.
I guess going back to the question on what could be in scope for a campaign, educating potential input to use the Ask Mountain View to increase awareness would be one type of action that I think you could kind of grow both awareness and kind of advocates for. Learn more about safety and what could be reported.
I second that. Almost
let's keep
nobody
the meeting
knows
in
about
order.
it.
Because I think once you're taking action, you're much more, you re-educate yourself constantly and you spread the word. And so that's, I guess, why not just the messaging, the follow through, I think it's the power behind it.
So one tangential comment on Ask Mountain View is that it's, even to me, it's sometimes confusing to know which category to put it. Is it something to go to the police, or is it the streets, or is it, public works? I mean, it could be easier to have something maybe like, in line with the message, like if it's a Vision Zero things, and then you guys sort it out if it's this department or the others, because that's it's a lot of work for people.
Yeah.
Who don't know how the city works,
Yeah.
right? So.
Anything going up or no? Okay.
I had a comment.
Yes.
We haven't had public comment on the staff presentation.
Oh.
yet. I don't think.
No hands on Zoom.
Okay, actually wasn't listed as an item, but.
Well, the staff presentation is a item that we go through the.
Okay. So do we have any, we have no public comments on Zoom, none in the room? Okay. Going through formal committee comments then.
Okay, I just want to say, on my way to Stanford, I biked on El Camino, not all the way, but I biked like next to the A-frame, no parking signs. And it was exciting. It wasn't a protected bike lane, but I was biking on El Camino, which is kind of amazing. Until I got to like El Camino and Shoreline, and then there's like the pinch thing. And there I kind of like squeezed it, like there was a red light, so I squeezed next to the car. And then there was like the pedestrian lead interval. It's great. I went up front and it was all good.
We're still on 7.1 though, right?
Yep, I think so. I'll second Lada's comment. Even though it's just paint, it's feels much better already. Further comment from committee? I guess we can close item 7, staff and committee comments, and move to item 8, date and time for next meeting.
Wait, committee comments isn't a separate thing?
There's a there's a 7.2.
Oh, he's okay.
The actual agenda.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Transfer everything. Okay, sorry. I thought I had to show it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we.
So general, moving from 7.1, closing 7.1 and going to 7.2 for general committee comments then.
I'm a general comments, and I'm glad we don't have 7-hour-long BPAC meetings like Santa Clara does.
Oh, wow.
I went and attended a Santa Clara BPAC meeting on Monday to see what they're like. Let's not replicate that.
It's more a question really, but what's the process to pick up something that the public may have mentioned? What specifically, but like no noise zone.
So,
Did you see the diagram?
yeah.
That's simple.
So if you're asking for, I guess, can you clarify your question? Is it asking for a new work plan item or?
Or to be able to discuss it or because I think there were valid points in this, I mean, not to discuss it.
Yeah. So BPAC needs to discuss things that are on the agenda. So it would probably be that process or talking about it in the work plan.
So it just my understanding of how we get something on the agenda to talk about it is that we put it on the work plans because staff will generally need to do some preparation to do anything that gets put on the agenda. Sometimes things get put on the agenda more ad hoc if they're like a really low effort thing, but generally for this sort of thing, it'd be we make a motion, which I think could be like in this period, could be in the work plan item, but we make a motion to request that it get added to the work plan. And then it goes through that diagram of if staff thinks it's low effort and if city leadership is fine with it, we can get it agendized to talk about. And if it's going to be more effort, then that becomes something the council has to decide if they want staff time spent on that and BPAC time spent on that. And we also tend to go through during the actual work plan, the annual actual work plan decision process. We'll sometimes try to, we'll more explicitly go through that since we're used to doing that then. But I don't think there's any restriction on us requesting that items be added at any time of the year.
No.
But it sounded.
It mostly happens at the annual work plan, but if something comes up, like in public comment, then if you think, yes, this is important and we should do it as soon as possible, then bringing that up and making a motion would be the way to go. That's my understanding.
Or if you find an item where it's
Yeah.
related.
Personally, my feeling is discussing that item about like what exact, if is appropriate to wait until the interim thing, project comes before us anyways. I think that's, to my mind, that's an appropriate time to discuss that. But I mean, I think we have other opinions.
It's all, we were discussing it. I think it's a bit different, but it's.
Yeah, you know, the grade crossing came before us some time ago for some input. That was pushed out more or less indefinitely, and it sounds like now there's another project for the interim. Would it naturally come to BPAC, or do we have to request it?
No, that interim is on the
think
list to be
Oh,
scheduled.
okay,
Yeah,
the
the
interim is
interim is
actually right
here.
there. Okay,
Yeah.
But it's not scheduled yet.
So it might not come for a while, but it
Yeah,
will
so it
be
might not
coming.
come for a while, and I'll say my feeling is that if we want to talk about like talking about quiet zones in general, that's something I'd rather have a discussion about when we do the annual work plan process, so we have a feel for what is coming before us overall. But I mean, yeah.
So the work plan discussion, it's coming in a few months, right?
The work plan is April 2nd.
Okay, so.
Oh, that's, sorry, that's
That's
council
draft work.
strategic. Oh, yeah, that's
Yeah.
the work plan, both of
So
them.
this is where we can.
Yeah.
speak
Yeah,
of
well, and that's where
ideas
we'll
and-
be thinking about what the entire next year is, so
Yeah.
it's a bit easier to say what will we have time for, that sort of thing.
All right, so I don't have my question.
Okay, and then otherwise, there's all the arrows.
Yeah. but I kind of lost track of the arrows.
Okay, now are we ready for date and time of next week? We concluded all committee comments? Thank you. So moving on, date and time for next meeting. As I read it, is February 26th. For next meeting, the normal time of 6:30 PM in conference room in City Hall. Your official version, we're ready for adjournment?
Yeah.
Okay, without further ado, calling the meeting to adjourn.
Thank you.
So what if adjournment is not on the agenda? You never get out? Maybe that's the issue in Santa
If
Clara.
you can say the time as you're doing it as well when we're writing
Okay,
minutes.
time